Welcome to a fascinating journey into human intimacy, desire, and the science of why sex feels so good. In this video, we'll explore brain chemistry, hormones, dopamine, oxytocin, pleasure, bonding, and evolution. Discover how biology, psychology, and connection create ecstasy, trust, and love, transforming reproduction into joy, creativity, and one of life's greatest mysteries. Of all the instincts that keep humanity alive, few are as puzzling as sex. Hunger drives us to eat, thirst pushes us to drink, and fatigue forces us to sleep. Each of those urges is powerful, but they feel like survival tools. They deliver satisfaction, yes, but once the immediate need is met, the drive quiets, the body resets, and the cycle continues. Sex is different. It is tied to survival just as directly, yet it feels disproportionately good compared to its biological purpose. People will skip meals, defy danger, and rearrange their lives around it, not simply to reproduce, but because the act itself is intensely pleasurable. That strange spark, this odd mismatch between function and feeling, is one of the most fascinating mysteries of biology. The disproportionate pleasure of sex is not easily explained by survival alone. A meal can taste delicious, a glass of water can quench thirst, but neither compares to the way sex ignites the nervous system and floods the brain with chemicals. From an evolutionary standpoint, the difference is strategic. Eating is required every day, multiple times. If meals carried the same intensity as sex, we would spend our lives lost in ecstatic distraction over sandwiches. Drinking water is even more fundamental, yet the pleasure is functional. Fading the moment thirst is gone. Sex, by contrast, is not needed every hour, not even every day. To ensure the continuation of the species, evolution had to make it compelling. So compelling that humans, and nearly every other animal that reproduces sexually, would seek it out even when danger or discomfort made it inconvenient. That is the first layer of the mystery. The drive to reproduce is ancient, stretching back to single-celled organisms swapping DNA in primitive oceans. But somewhere along the evolutionary chain, reproduction and pleasure became fused. What could have been a mechanical, dutiful act transformed into one of the most rewarding sensations life can offer. This fusion is what scientists and philosophers alike marvel at. Sex is survival wrapped in joy. It is duty disguised as delight. The nervous system plays a starring role in this strangeness. Skin, the body's largest organ, is mapped with millions of nerve endings. Some respond to pressure, some to heat, some to vibration, some to light brush. When these signals are layered, concentrated, and combined, the brain interprets them not as neutral information but as pleasure. These pathways are not unique to humans. Many mammals display signs of enjoyment in mating. But in humans, with our massive brains and layered emotions, these sensations are magnified, woven together with imagination, anticipation, and memory. A touch is not only a touch, it is a spark connected to a web of context, meaning, and possibility. Unlike hunger or thirst, sex also carries a strange persistence. Once you eat, appetite diminishes. But sexual desire has the odd ability to renew itself rapidly. The cycle of arousal, climax, and recovery can repeat, sometimes within hours. This built-in resilience ensures reproduction is not a one-time gamble, but a repeated effort, boosting the odds that life will continue. The intensity of the reward and the persistence of the drive create a loop, one evolution has depended upon for millions of years. The strange spark feels like indulgence, but it is also survival strategy. Culture, layered atop biology, has amplified this spark into something even greater. Food nourishes, but it rarely inspires poetry or song in the same way sex does. Sex has become the subject of myths, rituals, art, and endless storytelling. Its pleasure has shaped societies, drawn lovers together, sparked wars, and inspired devotion. If eating was as pleasurable as sex, history books might be filled with stories of empires built on feasts. Instead, it is sex, the act that ensures children are born, that has taken center stage in human imagination. That cultural weight feeds back into biology, heightening desire through fantasy, symbolism, and meaning. What makes sex even stranger is how universally it captivates across time and place. Every human who has ever lived shares this common thread. Hunger may differ based on what foods are available, thirst may be satisfied by water, tea, or wine, but sexual pleasure transcends cultural boundaries. It is as constant as breath, as old as humanity itself. To know that billions of people across history have felt the same spark, the same rush, is to realize how deeply rooted it is in the human condition. The disproportionate pleasure of sex also reveals something profound about evolution's gamble. Pleasure was never guaranteed. Reproduction could have been designed like any other function, mechanical and unremarkable. Some animals do reproduce without pleasure, driven by instinct alone. But humans, and many mammals, were wired differently. In making sex feel so good, evolution stacked the deck, ensuring that individuals would seek it out again and again, often without conscious thought of reproduction at all. The result is that the species thrives, not because anyone decided to preserve it, but because the act itself is irresistible. The mystery lies not in why sex exists, but in why it feels the way it does. The chemistry of the brain adds another layer to this disproportion. During sex, dopamine surges in reward pathways, the same circuits that light up during gambling, drug use, or delicious meals. Oxytocin floods the bloodstream, deepening trust and connection. Endorphins create euphoria, reducing pain and amplifying pleasure. Serotonin levels shift, creating afterglow and satisfaction. No meal releases such a potent cocktail. No glass of water triggers bonding hormones. Only sex activates this full symphony of chemicals, making it one of the most intoxicating experiences biology offers. This cocktail is why sex feels more than just physical. It is not simply nerves firing or muscles contracting, it is chemistry rewriting the brain, at least temporarily. Lovers feel closer, even bonded, after sharing intimacy. Strangers may feel a pull to repeat the experience. Long-term partners may find sex stabilizes bonds, quiets conflict, and renews affection. The disproportionate pleasure is not random indulgence, it is a mechanism for social cohesion. For humans, who thrive in groups and depend on cooperation, the ability of sex to cement connection may be as important as its role in reproduction. To think about your own existence is to realize you are the product of this mystery. At some moment, long before you had a name, two people were drawn together not only by instinct, but by the disproportionate joy of the act. You exist because sex was not neutral, but magnetic, because biology made reproduction irresistible. Every human alive is the result of this same spark. We are not only descended from survivors, but from people who found pleasure compelling enough to ensure life continued. Sex feels disproportionately good compared to its biological purpose because it had to. Evolution could not risk reproduction being ignored. So it tied survival to reward, grafting one onto the other so completely that they cannot be untangled. The result is a force that dominates biology, psychology, and culture alike. It is the spark that drives attraction, fuels intimacy, and inspires art. It is the reason life not only continues, but thrives with joy rather than duty alone. Pregnancy, hunger, thirst, and sleep are all necessary. But only sex carries this dual identity, essential and ecstatic, mundane and miraculous. That mismatch is what makes it feel like more than survival. It feels like meaning, like connection, like transcendence. Science may map the nerves and measure the hormones, but the disproportion remains a mystery, a reminder that some of biology's greatest secrets are wrapped not in logic, but in pleasure. To understand why sex feels so disproportionately good, you have to look backward, not decades or centuries, but millions and billions of years, deep into the currents of evolution itself. Long before human beings walked upright or even dreamed, long before mammals nursed their young, life faced a central challenge: how to keep itself going. Cells had to divide, genes had to copy, organisms had to find a way to persist through time. Without reproduction, the story of life would have ended almost as soon as it began. But nature did something ingenious. It tied the act of reproduction to pleasure, building a code into bodies that made the continuation of life irresistible. This ancient wiring is why we are here at all. In the beginning, reproduction was mechanical. Early single-celled organisms like bacteria and archaea simply split themselves in half, duplicating without ceremony. There was no need for pleasure, no courtship, no attraction, just division. The problem with this system was sameness. A clone is identical to its parent. Without variation, a population can be wiped out by a single threat, a virus, or a shift in environment. Sexual reproduction, by contrast, introduced mixing. Two individuals combined genetic material to create something new, unique, and better equipped to survive. Variation was the secret weapon. But sexual reproduction was costly. It required finding a partner, expending energy, taking risks. To make it worthwhile, evolution needed to reward it. The solution was sensation. Over countless generations, the nervous systems of animals evolved to recognize reproductive behaviors as intensely rewarding. What might otherwise be ignored became sought after, repeated, and refined. In mammals, specialized nerve endings responded to touch in sensitive regions, producing signals that surged into the brain's reward circuits. Neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin reinforced the behavior, encouraging it to happen again. Hormones like oxytocin bonded partners, increasing the chances they would cooperate long enough to raise offspring. Evolution created not just a mechanism for reproduction, but an incentive, a built-in joy that guaranteed the act would not be forgotten or avoided. This wiring is what scientists call an adaptive trait. Behaviors that increase the chance of survival and reproduction become more common over time. If a mutation made mating pleasurable, the individuals who carried it were more likely to reproduce, and their offspring inherited the same capacity for pleasure. Gradually, those traits spread. Over millions of years, sex became not only a biological necessity, but one of the most compelling sensations in existence. We are all descended from creatures who found reproduction rewarding enough to do it often and successfully. Those who did not are long gone, erased by the relentless sieve of natural selection. The depth of this code can be seen across the animal kingdom. Birds perform elaborate dances, their bodies flooded with hormones that drive attraction. Mammals pursue mates with intensity, often risking injury in competition. Even simple creatures like worms and insects display signs of drive, guided by chemical signals that ensure they reproduce before dying. Pleasure takes different forms in each species, but the principle is the same. Reproduction is incentivized. In humans, with our complex brains, this incentive is amplified into something overwhelming, layered with imagination, desire, and anticipation. Sex is not just instinct. It is thought, memory, and dream, all fueled by the same ancient code. What makes the code remarkable is how it integrates survival at both the individual and species level. For the individual, pleasure ensures motivation. For the species, reproduction ensures continuity. The two goals align, even if the individuals themselves are unaware of the deeper strategy. When someone feels arousal or joy in intimacy, they are experiencing a program written not yesterday, but millions of years ago. Their body is responding to signals honed by evolution, signals that whisper, "Do this again." It keeps the story going. The mystery is that the body translates survival into delight. as though nature disguised duty as reward. The brain's reward circuitry is at the center of this translation. Deep in the midbrain lies the nucleus accumbens, a cluster of neurons that lights up during sex. This same region responds to food, music, and addictive substances, but sex activates it with unmatched intensity. Dopamine floods synapses, creating euphoria, craving, and reinforcement. From an evolutionary perspective, this surge is not an accident. It is the code at work. By flooding the brain with pleasure during reproduction, nature ensures the act is remembered, sought out, and repeated. Without dopamine's rush, sex might be no more compelling than stretching or scratching. With it, sex becomes irresistible. Oxytocin, the so-called cuddle hormone, adds another layer. Released during intimacy, it strengthens trust and bonding between partners. In species where raising offspring requires cooperation, this bonding is essential. Parents who feel connected are more likely to share resources and protect their young. Again, the pleasure is not random. It is strategy. By making sex feel good emotionally as well as physically, evolution increases the survival odds of the next generation. Humans, with our long childhoods and dependent infants, need years of care. Without pleasure binding adults together, the cost of parenting might fracture partnerships too soon. The code solved this problem by making closeness itself rewarding. Even pain has been woven into this design. The overlap of pain and pleasure pathways in the nervous system means that intensity, even discomfort, can amplify arousal for some. From an evolutionary perspective, this may have helped ensure reproduction continued even in less than ideal conditions. What feels strange in modern language is again a reminder of the ancient code: survival at any cost, incentivized by sensation strong enough to override hesitation. The universality of this code explains why sex has such power across cultures and eras. No matter the beliefs, traditions, or taboos, humans everywhere feel the same surge of chemicals, the same sparks of nerves, the same draw toward intimacy. It is one of the few experiences that transcends time and geography. Art, religion, and law may shape how sex is expressed, but the underlying biology is the same. Written in the nervous system, coded in DNA, passed down from ancestors who could not resist the same pull. The paradox of the ancient code is that it works too well. Evolution designed sex for reproduction, but the pleasure is so strong that humans often seek it without reproductive intent. Contraception, creativity, and culture allow sex to become play, expression, and bonding rather than survival alone. In this sense, the code is both specific and flexible. Its original purpose is clear: make reproduction irresistible, but its consequences ripple outward into art, intimacy, and society itself. The strength of the pleasure created a force larger than biology, shaping relationships and even civilizations. The code also reveals why abstinence, celibacy, or suppression of sexual desire is so challenging. To resist hunger or thirst is already difficult, but to resist the call of sex is to fight against millions of years of programming. The drive is not a weakness of will, but a strength of biology. It is the echo of ancestors whose bodies rewarded them for ensuring continuity. When people speak of sexual desire as primal, they are correct. It is as old as the first organisms to mix genes, as old as life's desperate need to continue itself. To think about your own existence through this lens is humbling. You are alive because this code worked in your ancestors, because bodies before you were compelled by pleasure to reproduce. Every cell in your body carries DNA passed down through countless pairings, each one driven by the same wiring. You are the result of joy as much as survival, proof that the code did more than replicate. It made replication worth seeking. Without that spark, without that irresistible wiring, your story would never have begun. Sex feels so good not because life owed us joy, but because joy was the most reliable tool life had to keep itself going. The disproportionate pleasure is not an accident, but a design, refined over eons. It is the ancient code at work, the secret written into nerves and hormones that makes reproduction not only possible, but inevitable. Science may break down the molecules and pathways, but the wonder remains. Survival was hidden inside pleasure, and that trick of biology is why we are here at all. When people speak of sex, they often imagine the body, skin pressed to skin, muscles tensing, heart racing, nerves alive with sensation. But the true theatre of sex is not the body at all. It is the brain, that pulsing organ of thought, memory, and imagination. Every sigh, every shiver, every gasp is translated into chemistry there. What begins as a spark of touch or glance of attraction sets off a cascade of reactions so powerful that it has been compared to fire sweeping through a forest. Neurons ignite, signals surge, chemicals flood, and the entire brain hums with electricity. Sex feels so good because the brain itself is burning bright, flooded with neurotransmitters that transform ordinary contact into extraordinary ecstasy. The star of this chemical storm is dopamine, the neurotransmitter of anticipation, reward, and motivation. Long before climax, even before touch, dopamine begins to rise. Desire itself lights up dopamine pathways, particularly in the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area. These are the circuits that reward eating, drinking, or achieving a goal, but sex activates them with unparalleled intensity. The brain, bathed in dopamine, craves more, focusing attention sharply, narrowing vision to the source of arousal. It is why attraction feels obsessive, why desire sharpens the senses and bends thoughts in one direction. Dopamine is not about satisfaction. It is about wanting, pursuing, hungering. It makes the act not just appealing, but urgent. As arousal builds, other chemicals join the symphony. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, surges during physical touch and intimacy. Unlike dopamine, which fuels craving, oxytocin creates connection. It strengthens trust, softens fear, and weaves a feeling of closeness between partners. Released in the hypothalamus and pulsed into the bloodstream, oxytocin transforms sex from a mere physical act into an emotional bond. It is the reason intimacy can feel like merging, why a partner's presence feels safe and meaningful. Oxytocin is also released after orgasm, cementing the bond further. This chemistry ensures that sex does not merely create offspring, but fosters cooperation, a trait essential for raising dependent human children. Pleasure and connection, wired together, serve survival. Then there is serotonin, the mood stabilizer, balancing the chaos of arousal. During sexual activity, serotonin levels shift unpredictably, sometimes dipping, sometimes rising, but always influencing perception. It interacts with dopamine in complex ways, sometimes heightening desire, sometimes smoothing the edges of obsession. After climax, serotonin surges, bringing calm, satisfaction, and the dreamy afterglow. This is why post-sex relaxation feels so profound. The mind is bathed in the same neurotransmitter that antidepressants target, creating temporary bliss. It is not simply exhaustion, it is chemical peace. Endorphins enter the picture as well, natural opioids that dull pain and intensify pleasure. They are released during exercise, laughter, and even crying, but sex triggers them in abundance. The slight aches of exertion, the pressure of intense sensation, even moments that might otherwise feel uncomfortable, are transformed into pleasure under the influence of endorphins. They create euphoria, a floating sense of escape, the reason climax has been described as losing oneself or being carried away. In these moments, the brain is not just processing signals, it is drowning them in chemistry designed to amplify joy and silence discomfort. All of these neurotransmitters and hormones together make sex one of the most complex brain events in human life. Functional MRI studies show that nearly every region of the brain activates during arousal and orgasm. The amygdala, seat of emotion, lights up. The prefrontal cortex, normally the governor of logic and restraint, goes dark, silencing judgment. The insula, which processes body awareness, flares, making every touch feel magnified. The cerebellum coordinates the physical rhythm, while the hippocampus encodes memory, ensuring the experience is not forgotten. It is as though the brain devotes its entire network to the event, dimming some lights, brightening others, orchestrating a full body and full mind immersion. What makes this so extraordinary is that it is not confined to the moment itself. Anticipation alone can trigger dopamine, fantasies can release oxytocin, and even memory can reignite serotonin pathways. The brain does not need physical contact to feel sexual pleasure. Imagination alone can spark the chemistry, proof of how deeply the experience is rooted in the mind. This explains why erotic thought, storytelling, and daydreaming have such power. The brain does not distinguish sharply between what is imagined and what is real. Neurotransmitters still flow, circuits still light up, and pleasure is still felt. The fire is lit not only by touch, but by thought itself. Evolution's brilliance lies in how these chemicals overlap. Dopamine makes us pursue sex, oxytocin makes us bond, serotonin soothes us afterward, and endorphins keep discomfort at bay. Together, they transform reproduction into something irresistible, bonding, and rewarding. Without this flood, sex might feel no more important than stretching sore muscles. With it, sex becomes an obsession, a joy, and a glue holding societies together. The disproportionate pleasure is the result of the brain's chemistry working at full intensity, creating sensations far beyond what the act alone would require. Consider the paradox. The body's survival depends on reproduction, but the brain does not consciously care about genes. It cares about pleasure. When people seek sex, they are not thinking of passing on DNA. They are chasing the fire in the brain. Evolution wrote the code so that survival hides beneath joy. The individual experiences intimacy, connection, and ecstasy, while the species quietly continues. It is a trick of chemistry so effective that it has carried humanity through every century. The Brain on Fire explains why sex has inspired poetry, worship, and endless pursuit. People are not only seeking partners, they are seeking the chemical cascade, the rush of dopamine, the flood of oxytocin, the calm of serotonin, the euphoria of endorphins. These neurotransmitters sculpt experience so intensely that the memory lingers, sometimes for years. A single encounter can etch itself into identity, not because of the mechanics, but because of the chemistry. To remember a lover is often to remember how the brain felt, ignited, alive, expanded. Science can measure these surges, chart them on scans, quantify them in molecules per milliliter of blood. But the lived reality is still mysterious. To the person in the moment, it feels like transcendence, as though the mind has lifted out of ordinary time. The brain is, in fact, flooding itself with chemistry designed to make reproduction inevitable. Yet subjectively, it feels like magic, like connection beyond words. This gap between mechanism and meaning is part of the wonder. We know what neurotransmitters are firing, but we still cannot capture why the fire feels holy. Sex feels so good because the brain is not passive. It does not simply receive input from the body. It interprets, amplifies, and rewards. It takes nerve signals and drenches them in dopamine and oxytocin until they feel larger than life. It shuts off logic, ignites emotion, and creates memories infused with chemistry. No meal, no drink, no nap engages the brain this completely. The fire is unique, and it is why sex stands apart from every other biological act. When you think about your own beginnings, you realize that you are here because this chemistry worked. Somewhere in the past, two people's brains lit up with dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. They were drawn together not by logic but by fire. Their reward circuits demanded it. Their bonding hormones encouraged it. Their afterglow calmed them. You exist because the brain on fire is irresistible. Every human alive carries this legacy, not just in their DNA but in their neurochemistry. Pregnancy may be miraculous, bones may be built from borrowed calcium, but the story begins earlier, with this brain fire. Without pleasure wired into neurons, without dopamine flooding circuits, without oxytocin weaving bonds, life might have faltered. The fire ensured it burned on. That is why sex feels so good. It is not indulgence but design. It is not accident but ancient code. The brain was built to catch fire, to translate reproduction into ecstasy, and in doing so to keep the species alive. Sex begins with touch, and yet touch is more than a spark for intimacy. It is one of the most complex sensory systems in the human body, a network of nerves, receptors, and pathways that detect mechanical pressure, temperature, vibration, stretch, and pain. From the first brush of fingertips to the firm grasp of muscles, touch activates layers of biology designed not only for survival, but for pleasure. Understanding why sex feels good requires understanding how touch itself works, how skin is wired, how signals travel, and how the nervous system transforms pressure on the surface into sensations that echo through the brain. The skin is the body's largest organ, covering about 2 square meters in adults and weighing more than any other single system. It is not uniform. It contains specialized receptors tuned to different kinds of stimulation. Merkel cells respond to sustained pressure, giving fine detail to touch. Meissner's corpuscles detect light brushing and flutter, critical for delicate contact. Pacinian corpuscles sense deep vibration and rapid pressure changes, allowing sensitivity to motion and rhythm. Ruffini endings detect skin stretch, essential for body awareness and continuous movement. Together, these mechanoreceptors map every surface of the body into a mosaic of sensitivity. During sex, when touch is focused, these receptors fire in patterns that the brain interprets as pleasure, building layers of sensation that spread across the body. Certain areas, often called erogenous zones, have higher densities of nerve endings. The lips, genitals, nipples, and inner thighs contain clusters of receptors that magnify touch. This concentration means that even a light stimulus produces a flood of signals. The penis and clitoris, for example, contain thousands of sensory neurons per square centimeter, far more than most other regions. These neurons project directly to spinal pathways specialized for sexual reflexes, ensuring that stimulation produces rapid and powerful responses. But touch is not confined to these zones. The back, arms, face, and even scalp contain receptors that, when activated in certain ways, can contribute to arousal. The entire skin surface can become part of the sexual response because all of it is connected through the nervous system to the brain's reward centers. Signals from touch receptors travel through peripheral nerves to the spinal cord. From there, they ascend via the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway and spinothalamic tract toward the thalamus, the brain's central relay station. The thalamus distributes information to the somatosensory cortex, where touch is mapped in a distorted but precise fashion. This map, called the homunculus, gives larger cortical representation to more sensitive regions. Hands, lips, and genitals occupy disproportionate areas, meaning the brain devotes more neurons to processing these signals. When touched, these areas light up in vivid detail, producing stronger sensations than stimulation of less sensitive zones. Touch also recruits the insular cortex, a region linked to emotional processing and body awareness. This is where the raw mechanics of touch become layered with meaning. A stroke on the arm is not just pressure, it is context, interpreted as soothing, arousing, or neutral depending on circumstance. See tactile afference, a special class of unmyelinated nerve fibers, respond specifically to slow, gentle stroking. They do not carry sharp detail but emotional tone, projecting to brain regions involved in affect rather than precise sensation. These fibers are thought to underlie the pleasure of caress, making touch feel not only physical but emotionally rewarding. Muscles also play a role in how touch is experienced. Muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs provide feedback on movement and tension. During intimacy, when bodies press, shift and adjust, these proprioceptive signals combine with skin input to create a holistic body map. The body does not experience isolated touches, but coordinated interactions of pressure, stretch and motion. This integration makes touch dynamic, a sensation that changes with posture, angle and force. Each adjustment produces new patterns of nerve firing, keeping the experience fluid and varied. Blood vessels amplify touch by changing local physiology. During arousal, vasodilation increases blood flow to skin and genital tissues. Swelling enhances sensitivity by stretching receptors and increasing contact with nerve endings. Flushed skin and warmth are visible signs of this vascular change, but beneath the surface, it makes every stroke and pressure more noticeable. In genitals, engorgement increases friction against nerve-rich surfaces, intensifying stimulation. The vascular system, under the influence of nitric oxide and parasympathetic signals, prepares the skin and tissues to maximize the impact of touch. The spinal cord coordinates reflexes that respond to tactile input without requiring conscious thought. Genital reflex arcs, for instance, mediate erection, lubrication, and rhythmic contractions in response to stimulation. These reflexes ensure that sexual activity continues even without deliberate control, sustaining arousal through automatic processes. The brain modulates these reflexes, enhancing or inhibiting them depending on context, but the reflex circuits themselves are robust. This dual system, automatic reflex combined with conscious modulation, allows touch to feel both involuntary and chosen, amplifying the sense of intensity. Neurotransmitters deepen the response. Dopamine, released during anticipation and stimulation, increases sensitivity to touch by heightening focus and reward. Oxytocin, triggered by skin-to-skin contact, reduces stress responses, making touch feel safe and bonding. Endorphins, released during sustained stimulation, dull discomfort and magnify pleasure. These chemicals mean that the same physical stimulus can feel vastly different depending on arousal state. A light touch on the arm when distracted might barely register, but in moments of intimacy, with dopamine and oxytocin flowing, the same touch can feel electrifying. Touch during sex also interacts with other sensory systems. Visual cues can prime the brain to expect stimulation, making receptors more responsive. Sounds, from whispers to breaths, can amplify the emotional tone, changing how touch is perceived. Even smell plays a role, as pheromonal signals influence hormonal state and sensitivity. The brain integrates these inputs, layering them onto tactile signals to create a richer, more immersive experience. This multisensory integration is why sex rarely feels confined to one sense. Touch dominates, but it is colored by sight, sound, and scent. Clinical studies demonstrate how essential touch is to sexual satisfaction. Patients with spinal cord injuries that disrupt tactile pathways often report diminished or altered sexual experience, even if hormonal and emotional systems remain intact. Conversely, focused tactile stimulation can sometimes produce orgasm even without genital contact, showing how powerful skin input alone can be. These findings confirm that touch is not accessory to sex, but fundamental, the backbone of sensation that drives arousal and climax. From an evolutionary perspective, the wiring of skin for pleasure serves clear purposes. It ensures that partners are motivated to engage in close contact, increasing the likelihood of reproduction. It encourages prolonged interaction, strengthening pair bonds through repeated touch. It also facilitates non-sexual bonding, since the same nerve fibers respond to affectionate touch between parent and child, or between friends. This overlap means that the reward of touch supports both reproduction and social cohesion, critical for species like humans that rely on cooperation. What makes touch extraordinary in sex is not that it exists, but that it has been fine-tuned to produce reward far beyond survival. A brush of lips does not feed the body, a caress on the back does not supply nutrients, yet the nervous system treats these actions as deeply significant. By linking touch to pleasure, evolution ensured that reproduction and intimacy were irresistible. The body became not only a vehicle for genes, but a sensory field designed to make closeness compelling. When you reflect on your own body, you realize that every inch of skin is connected to this system. Every receptor, every nerve fiber, every reflex arc is part of a network that interprets pressure as meaning. In moments of intimacy, that network ignites, sending floods of information to the brain, triggering chemistry, and producing the sensations we describe as sexual pleasure. You are not just feeling touch. You are experiencing a coordinated performance of skin, muscles, blood, and nerves, each playing its role in the body's symphony of arousal. Sex feels so good not only because of hormones in the brain or evolutionary imperatives, but because touch itself has been wired as a reward system. It is the direct translation of physical contact into neural pleasure, the transformation of pressure into ecstasy. The role of touch is not secondary, it is central, the mechanism through which the body turns survival into joy. In every caress, every shiver, every tightening of muscle, you can see the ancient design at work, ensuring that life continues not only with persistence, but with delight. When people talk about sex, the conversation often drifts to the body, the skin, the nerves, the muscles, the genitals. But the truth is that the most powerful sex organ has always been the brain. It is the brain that interprets touch, amplifies sensation, creates desire, and transforms reproduction into ecstasy. Without the brain, touch would be nothing more than pressure, friction, or temperature. It is the mind that turns those signals into meaning, weaving them into pleasure, intimacy, and longing. What happens between the ears is the reason sex feels good before it even happens, the reason anticipation can rival reality, and the reason fantasy can ignite arousal without a single touch. The brain governs sexual experience through networks of neurons that span both primitive and advanced regions. Deep in the hypothalamus, ancient circuits drive basic urges, controlling hormones and reflexes that sustain arousal. These are survival systems, honed by millions of years of evolution, ensuring reproduction continues. But layered over them is the cerebral cortex, the seat of imagination, language, and culture. It allows humans to fantasize, to create mental scenarios, to feel aroused by thought alone. This combination of primal drive and sophisticated imagination makes human sexuality uniquely flexible. Other animals mate by instinct. Humans can become aroused by memory, story, dream, or anticipation, often long before the first nerve in the skin is touched. Anticipation itself is one of the most powerful forces in the sexual experience. The brain's dopamine system, particularly the nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area, responds most strongly not to reward itself, but to the expectation of reward. Waiting, imagining, and building tension all stimulate dopamine release, focusing attention and heightening desire. This is why foreplay, flirting, and even simple eye contact can feel electric. The brain lights up not because anything physical is happening, but because it predicts what might come next. Anticipation sharpens the senses, makes the skin more sensitive, and prepares the body for arousal. In some cases, the build-up can be more intense than the climax itself. a demonstration of how powerful the brain's predictive circuits are in shaping pleasure. Fantasy adds another dimension. Humans can create entire erotic experiences without leaving the mind, using imagination to simulate scenarios, partners, or encounters. Brain imaging shows that imagining sexual activity activates many of the same areas as actual activity: the amygdala for emotion, the insula for body awareness, the prefrontal cortex for planning, and the motor cortex for simulation of movement. Fantasy is not a pale substitute. It is a rehearsal that can trigger physiological changes, from increased blood flow to heightened sensitivity. This capacity makes human sexuality unbounded by the present moment. A person alone in a room can experience arousal as vividly as if they were touched, proof that the brain is not only an interpreter of sensation, but a generator of it. Culture feeds directly into these brain pathways. Stories, images, and social cues all shape desire, priming the brain to respond in ways that go beyond biology. What one society considers arousing may differ from another, yet the neural machinery is the same. The prefrontal cortex, which handles symbolic thought, allows humans to link arousal to clothing, gestures, or rituals, even when those things have no direct biological role. This flexibility makes sexuality highly diverse, shaped as much by imagination and environment as by genes. Between the ears, desire becomes not only instinct, but interpretation, a product of both neural wiring and cultural input. Memory also plays a vital role. The hippocampus, responsible for forming and retrieving memories, interacts with the brain's reward systems to shape expectation. A remembered touch, a recalled encounter, or even a lingering scent can reignite arousal long after the event. Memory is why sexual experiences can leave such deep imprints, influencing future attraction and desire. It is also why trauma or negative experiences can alter sexual response, as the brain integrates those memories into circuits that govern arousal. The mind does not separate past from present cleanly. It brings both into the experience, intensifying or dampening desire depending on what has been encoded. The prefrontal cortex, often called the brain's executive center, plays a dual role. It can heighten arousal by imagining scenarios, planning encounters, and layering meaning onto touch. But it can also suppress arousal, introducing judgment, inhibition, or anxiety. This is why distraction, stress, or fear can interfere with sexual response. The same brain that fuels fantasy can also short-circuit desire when overwhelmed by negative thought. Clinical research shows that sexual dysfunction often has less to do with the body's capacity and more to do with the prefrontal cortex interfering with signals from deeper, more instinctual regions. Relaxation and trust quiet the prefrontal cortex, allowing the limbic system and hypothalamus to drive the experience. In this sense, good sex often means not only stimulation, but release from overthinking, a temporary surrender of logic to sensation. Anticipation, fantasy, and imagination also intensify arousal through the release of neurotransmitters. Dopamine surges during the build-up, sharpening focus and heightening pleasure. Oxytocin, released through intimacy and even imagined closeness, strengthens the sense of bonding. Serotonin stabilizes mood, giving afterglow its tranquility. Endorphins reduce stress and pain, creating euphoria. These chemicals flow whether the stimulation is physical or imagined. This is why erotic dreams can trigger physical responses, why mental rehearsal can lead to real physiological changes, and why imagination alone can be enough to induce climax in some individuals. The brain does not always distinguish between reality and fantasy when releasing its chemical rewards. From a survival standpoint, wiring the brain so powerfully into sex makes sense. It guarantees motivation. Animals that rely only on instinct reproduce when conditions align. Humans, with imagination and memory, can sustain desire even outside optimal conditions, ensuring reproduction occurs frequently enough to maintain populations. The brain's capacity to fantasize also fosters bonding. Partners who share stories, roleplay, or anticipation strengthen emotional ties, aided by oxytocin and dopamine. Pleasure becomes not just physical, but relational, knitting individuals together in ways that benefit child-rearing and social cohesion. Clinical science shows just how central the brain is to sexual experience. Patients with spinal cord injuries who lose sensation below the waist can still experience arousal and even orgasm through mental imagery alone. Brain scans reveal activation of reward circuits in the absence of physical input, demonstrating that the mind itself is sufficient to produce pleasure. Conversely, individuals with damage to the prefrontal cortex or limbic system may experience diminished desire despite intact physical function. These cases prove that what happens between the ears is not accessory, but fundamental. The brain is the primary organ of sex, the body its amplifier. The cultural dimension magnifies this further. Literature, film, art, and even casual storytelling all tap into the brain's erotic imagination. When people respond to narrative or symbolism, they are activating the same circuits that respond to touch. Anticipation builds, dopamine flows, and arousal follows. This explains why human sexuality is so diverse, why it can be shaped by personal history, social environment, and cultural symbolism. The brain's flexibility makes sex endlessly variable, more than reproduction, more than instinct, more than survival. It becomes identity, expression, creativity, all because the brain transforms signals into stories and stories into desire. To think about your own experience is to realize that every moment of arousal began between your ears. The glance that made your heart race, the story that lingered in your mind, the dream that left you stirred. These were products of the brain's imagination. Even the most physical encounter would have been muted without the brain interpreting, amplifying, and rewarding it. You do not just feel touch, you feel what the brain makes of it, an experience woven with memory, fantasy, and chemistry. Sex feels so good because it is not just a reflex of the body, but a performance of the mind. The brain takes pressure and friction, adds dopamine and oxytocin, overlays imagination and anticipation, and transforms them into ecstasy. This is why desire can ignite without contact, why anticipation can rival satisfaction, why memory can trigger arousal years later. Between the ears, survival becomes pleasure, biology becomes meaning, and instinct becomes intimacy. The brain is the largest erogenous zone, the hidden stage where sex truly begins. Desire is not just nerves firing or skin reacting. Beneath the surface, the body's chemistry brews a potent mix of hormones that amplify sensitivity, stir motivation, and transform arousal into an all-encompassing experience. This hormonal cocktail, led by testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, works in constant interplay with neurotransmitters like dopamine and oxytocin. It shapes not only how strongly sex is desired, but also how intensely it is felt. Every heartbeat, every pulse of attraction, every rush of arousal is steeped in this chemistry, a silent river flowing through blood and brain alike. Testosterone is often called the hormone of desire, and with good reason. Although most people associate it with men, testosterone is present in all bodies, influencing sex drive, sensitivity, and arousal across genders. Higher levels are strongly correlated with libido, and even small fluctuations can change the intensity of desire. Produced primarily in the testes and ovaries, and to a lesser degree in the adrenal glands, testosterone primes the brain's reward circuits, heightens responsiveness to sexual cues, and fuels the energy needed for pursuit. It sharpens focus on partners, increases sensitivity to touch, and amplifies the intensity of climax. Without testosterone, sexual motivation tends to diminish, which is why conditions or medications that lower it often reduce libido. Yet its power is not absolute. It works in partnership with other hormones, weaving itself into a broader symphony. Estrogen, often thought of as the hormone of femininity, plays just as critical a role. It influences blood flow, lubrication, and the sensitivity of tissues, making arousal more vivid and sustained. Rising estrogen levels during the menstrual cycle correlate with increased desire, heightened receptivity to touch, and greater intensity of orgasm. Estrogen enhances the release of dopamine in the brain, boosting the reward of sexual activity, and increases oxytocin, deepening feelings of intimacy. It does not merely prime the body, but enriches the emotional resonance of sex, making encounters feel more bonding and satisfying. Beyond reproduction, estrogen's role in arousal highlights its function as a hormone of pleasure, ensuring that the act is sought and repeated. Progesterone adds complexity to this chemistry. Often described as a balancing hormone, it modulates mood, dampens or enhances libido depending on timing, and stabilizes the effects of estrogen. During certain phases of the menstrual cycle, elevated progesterone may reduce sexual desire, focusing the body instead on nurturing and conserving energy. Yet it also influences relaxation and receptivity, calming the nervous system and making intimacy feel more soothing. Progesterone interacts with the brain's GABA receptors, the same channels affected by sedatives, creating a calming influence. This may explain why, in some contexts, progesterone-rich states are linked to more tender, affectionate sexual behavior rather than raw intensity. It reminds us that sex is not a single state but a spectrum, shifting as hormones ebb and flow. The interplay of testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone does not stop at biology. These hormones change across the lifespan, reshaping sexuality with age. In adolescence, surges of testosterone and estrogen ignite desire, often chaotic and overwhelming. In adulthood, levels stabilize, fostering more predictable cycles of libido. Later in life, declines in hormone levels can reduce arousal or sensitivity, but the brain's adaptability, combined with cultural and emotional factors, ensures that sex remains meaningful. Hormonal therapy, whether for menopause or gender transition, demonstrates how profoundly these chemicals shape sexual experience. Adjusting them alters not just the body but the very intensity and quality of desire. These three primary hormones also interact with neurotransmitters, creating overlapping cascades of chemistry. Testosterone increases dopamine activity, reinforcing motivation. Estrogen enhances oxytocin release, making touch feel bonding and affectionate. Progesterone calms excitatory circuits, slowing some responses while deepening others. Together, they form a shifting cocktail that ensures sex is not static. Desire can spike, ebb, or transform depending on timing, health, and environment. This variability explains why libido is not the same every day or for every person. It is not weakness or inconsistency. It is biology's design, making sex flexible, responsive, and dynamic. The hormonal cocktail also shapes physical responses. Testosterone enhances vascular responsiveness, contributing to stronger erections and greater genital sensitivity. Estrogen promotes tissue elasticity and lubrication, increasing comfort and pleasure. Progesterone influences uterine contractions and muscle tone, contributing to the subtle internal rhythms felt during climax. These effects are not isolated. They work together, creating a system in which the entire body is engaged. Sex feels good not only because of touch or imagination, but because hormones prepare the body to receive those signals more vividly, to amplify them into something unforgettable. From an evolutionary standpoint, this cocktail was essential. By tying hormonal fluctuations to desire, nature ensured reproduction occurred at optimal times. Estrogen peaks around ovulation when fertility is highest, and libido often rises accordingly. Testosterone maintains baseline drive across the cycle, ensuring motivation does not vanish. Progesterone prepares the body for possible pregnancy, shifting desire toward bonding and care. These patterns may be ancient echoes of survival strategies, ensuring that reproduction was not left to chance but coordinated with biology. Yet in modern life, with contraception and cultural variation, these hormones still exert their influence, not for survival, but for pleasure and intimacy. Hormonal imbalances reveal just how critical this chemistry is. Low testosterone can cause diminished libido, reduced sensitivity, and difficulty achieving climax. Low estrogen may lead to dryness, discomfort, or loss of arousal. Excess progesterone can dampen desire and mood. Medical conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, thyroid disorders, or adrenal dysfunction can all disrupt sexual response by altering hormone levels. Treatments that restore balance often restore sexual function as well, confirming that the cocktail is not a metaphor, but a literal engine of desire. The story becomes even more complex when considering how stress interacts with hormones. Cortisol, the stress hormone, can suppress testosterone and estrogen, reducing libido. Chronic stress often leads to diminished desire, not because sex has lost its appeal, but because cortisol is interfering with the body's ability to brew its cocktail. Conversely, sex itself reduces cortisol through oxytocin and endorphins, creating a feedback loop where intimacy lowers stress and stress lowers intimacy. Balancing these forces is delicate, but it underscores how hormones are not isolated. They are part of an entire endocrine network that connects reproduction, survival, and emotional life. For all of this complexity, what matters most is that hormones make sex feel good in ways beyond survival. They amplify sensitivity, deepen emotion, and heighten motivation. They ensure that desire is not a fleeting impulse but a recurring drive, that touch is not neutral but electric, and that climax is not just muscle contraction, but ecstasy. Without testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, sex might be functional, but it would not feel like the most compelling act in human life. With them, sex becomes irresistible, unforgettable, and profoundly rewarding. To reflect on your own body is to recognize that every moment of arousal is steeped in chemistry. The quickening of breath, the racing of heart, the flush of skin, all are orchestrated by hormones flowing through blood, binding to receptors, and altering neural activity. You are not simply reacting to another person. You are experiencing the culmination of millions of years of evolution, a hormonal cocktail brewed to make sex worth seeking, worth repeating, worth remembering. Sex feels so good not by accident, but by design. Hormones ensured that survival would not depend on duty alone. They made reproduction intoxicating, binding partners together and weaving pleasure into biology. Testosterone ignites, estrogen enriches, progesterone balances. Together, they create the alchemy of desire. It is not poetry, but physiology, not mystery, but chemistry. Yet it still feels like magic. Sex feels overwhelming not just because of hormones or nerves in the skin, but because of a single neurotransmitter that acts like the conductor of the brain's reward system, dopamine. Often described as the molecule of desire and reward, dopamine is the chemical that makes food taste better when you are hungry, that drives you to chase goals, and that keeps you coming back to things that feel good. But when it comes to sex, dopamine's role is magnified beyond almost any other activity. The brain is flooded with it during arousal, and climax delivers a surge that rivals addictive substances, exercise highs, and even gambling wins. This high of dopamine is not random indulgence, but biology's way of ensuring that sex is not just performed, but pursued with passion. Dopamine does not simply create pleasure. Its real power is anticipation. Long before the act begins, dopamine is already at work. When attraction sparks, when flirting begins, when desire is building, dopamine pathways in the brain ignite. These pathways, centered in the ventral tegmental area and nucleus accumbens, are the same ones that motivate hunting, eating, and learning. They do not reward you after success alone. They reward you for seeking success. This is why desire can feel obsessive, why thinking about a partner or imagining sex can become consuming. Dopamine narrows focus, intensifies craving, and heightens every cue related to the goal. It makes the sound of a voice, the sight of a glance, or the thought of touch feel magnetic. In a sense, dopamine hijacks attention, making sex impossible to ignore. When sexual activity begins, dopamine release intensifies. Each new touch or gesture is processed as a signal that reward is closer, and dopamine surges further. The cycle builds. The more you anticipate, the more dopamine flows, and the more sensitive the brain becomes to every cue. This is why foreplay can feel electric, why even small touches can feel amplified. The brain is not only processing sensation, it is primed by dopamine to treat those sensations as significant, as rewards on the way to climax. The entire nervous system becomes tuned to pleasure, waiting for the final surge. Climax itself produces one of the strongest dopamine highs the brain can deliver. In animal studies, dopamine levels during orgasm rise several times higher than baseline, lighting up reward pathways with explosive intensity. This is the same neurochemical storm triggered by addictive drugs, but in sex, it is natural, safe, and evolutionarily beneficial. The flood of dopamine creates euphoria, a sense of release, and an urge to repeat the experience. That urge is critical to survival because it ensures sex is not rare but frequent. The brain remembers the dopamine rush, associates it with the act, and seeks it again. This loop, desire, anticipation, climax, reward, is the engine of reproduction, and dopamine is its fuel. What makes dopamine especially fascinating is that it rewards the chase as much as the catch. In studies, dopamine spikes higher when a reward is uncertain than when it is guaranteed. This means anticipation of sex, the uncertainty of whether it will happen, or the excitement of pursuit can sometimes be as stimulating as sex itself. This explains the thrill of seduction, the magnetism of new relationships, and the intoxicating feeling of falling in love. Dopamine thrives on possibility, on the maybe, on the what if. This chemistry ensures that sex is not only about reproduction, but about seeking, chasing, and craving, keeping motivation high, even when circumstances are not perfect. The addictive quality of sex is rooted in dopamine's power. Just as drugs like cocaine or amphetamines flood the brain with dopamine artificially, sex does it naturally. Both create cravings, both reinforce behaviors, both drive repetition. The difference is that sex, unlike drugs, carries evolutionary purpose. The craving it creates ensures genes are passed on. The reward loop is not a malfunction, but a design, one of the most efficient strategies evolution ever invented. Yet it comes with a cost. Sex can dominate thought, inspire risk, and override logic, because dopamine makes it feel too important to ignore. Dopamine does not act alone. Its effects are intertwined with other neurochemicals. Oxytocin, released during touch and climax, works alongside dopamine to strengthen bonding. Serotonin rises after climax, balancing dopamine's intensity with calm. Endorphins soften pain and heighten euphoria, complementing dopamine's thrill. But dopamine is the one that initiates the chase, that transforms sex from simple touch into irresistible pursuit. Without dopamine, arousal might be mechanical, unmotivated, and forgettable. With dopamine, it becomes obsession, passion, and memory. The high of dopamine is not limited to the act of sex itself. It spills over into love, romance, and attachment. In new relationships, dopamine levels are consistently elevated, creating euphoria, sleeplessness, and a constant desire for the other person. This honeymoon phase is essentially a prolonged dopamine rush, making every interaction feel rewarding. Over time, dopamine levels stabilize, but the brain never loses its capacity to flood itself during moments of intimacy. Long-term partners may not feel the same constant rush, but shared intimacy can reignite dopamine surges, reinforcing bonds again and again. The high may become less frantic, but it remains powerful. Clinical science demonstrates dopamine's centrality in sexuality. People with Parkinson's disease, which involves dopamine deficits, often report reduced libido, confirming the neurotransmitter's role in desire. Conversely, medications that increase dopamine activity can sometimes trigger hypersexuality, revealing just how sensitive sexuality is to this chemical. Imaging studies show that dopamine released during arousal and orgasm mirrors the patterns seen in drug addiction, further proving that sex is one of the most potent natural dopamine triggers. Even fantasy and pornography activate these pathways, showing that the brain does not always need physical contact to ignite dopamine surges. The mind alone can simulate reward, reinforcing the cycle of craving and pursuit. Dopamine also explains why sexual desire can be so unpredictable. It is not a simple on-off switch, but a dynamic system influenced by novelty, uncertainty, and context. Familiar partners may still spark dopamine surges, but new experiences often produce higher spikes thanks to the brain's preference for unpredictability. This does not mean long-term desire is doomed. It simply means that novelty, new contexts, new settings, new layers of intimacy can help reignite dopamine's fires. Understanding this has practical implications for relationships, helping couples sustain desire by creating variation and surprise. At its core, dopamine is about motivation. It does not guarantee happiness but drives the pursuit of it. In sex, it ensures the act is not neglected. People do not just stumble into reproduction, they are compelled by the high of dopamine to seek it again and again. The fact that this same chemical also fuels love, creativity, and risk-taking shows how central it is to human behavior. But in sex, dopamine's power is distilled, focused, and overwhelming. A chemical current that explains why sex feels like one of life's most irresistible experiences. To think about your own existence is to realize that you are here because of dopamine. Somewhere in the past, your parents' brains lit up with dopamine during attraction, pursuit, and climax. Their reward circuits made the act irresistible, ensuring reproduction occurred. You are alive because dopamine made sex too rewarding to ignore. Every generation before you was carried forward by the same neurochemical, a chain of reward and reproduction stretching back millions of years. Sex feels so good because dopamine makes it so. It floods the brain during arousal, heightens every touch, amplifies every cue, and explodes during climax. It makes desire obsessive, pursuit thrilling, and memory indelible. It ensures that survival is not left to duty, but driven by craving. The high of dopamine is the hidden current beneath every spark of intimacy, the ancient engine of reproduction, and the reason sex is not only irresistible, but unforgettable. In the long chemical symphony of sex, one hormone stands apart, not for the thrill of arousal or the rush of climax, but for what follows afterward. It is oxytocin, often called the cuddle hormone, a chemical that does not ignite desire in the same way as dopamine or testosterone, but instead deepens connection, trust, and attachment. Released during intimacy, orgasm, and even simple affectionate touch, oxytocin is the biological glue that helps hold people together. Its influence stretches far beyond the bedroom, shaping relationships, bonding parents with children, soothing stress, and weaving threads of trust that anchor social life. To understand why sex feels not just pleasurable but meaningful, you must look to oxytocin. Oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus, a deep brain region that governs many fundamental processes, including hunger, thirst, circadian rhythms, and reproductive functions. From there, it is released into the bloodstream through the posterior pituitary gland and also sent directly into the brain's circuits. This dual release means oxytocin acts both as a hormone circulating in the body and as a neurotransmitter altering brain activity. Its reach is broad, influencing the uterus and breasts during childbirth and lactation, but also modulating brain regions responsible for trust, empathy, and bonding. In sexual activity, oxytocin's role emerges most clearly in the moments of closeness and afterglow, when the rush of dopamine quiets and a calmer chemistry takes over. During orgasm, oxytocin release spikes dramatically. In men and women alike, blood levels of oxytocin surge, coinciding with feelings of warmth, closeness, and satisfaction. This spike is not fleeting. It lingers in the bloodstream, influencing mood and behavior for minutes or even hours afterward. This is why sex often produces not just release, but connection, why partners may feel unusually affectionate, safe, and trusting after intimacy. While dopamine drives pursuit, oxytocin cements bonds, turning fleeting encounters into emotional anchors. The power of oxytocin is not confined to sex. It is also released during hugging, kissing, holding hands, and even eye contact. Parents experience oxytocin surges when holding or nursing their babies, creating the powerful bonds that ensure care and protection. In evolutionary terms, this is essential. Human infants are uniquely dependent, requiring years of attention. Oxytocin makes caregiving rewarding, not just dutiful, ensuring that parents feel joy and connection in caring for their children. The same chemistry that glues partners together in intimacy glues families together in survival. In the brain, oxytocin influences the amygdala, a region central to emotion and fear. It dampens amygdala activity, reducing anxiety and increasing feelings of safety. This is why closeness with a trusted partner feels calming, why stress seems to melt in an embrace. Oxytocin also enhances activity in reward pathways, overlapping with dopamine circuits to reinforce affectionate behavior. When intimacy is repeated, oxytocin release makes partners feel increasingly bonded, strengthening trust over time. It is not only a hormone of sex, but of loyalty, commitment, and emotional security. Clinical studies reveal how profound oxytocin's effects are. When administered artificially, oxytocin increases trust in economic games, making participants more likely to cooperate and less likely to suspect betrayal. It also enhances empathy, increasing the ability to read emotional cues in faces and voices. In sexual health, higher oxytocin levels correlate with greater satisfaction, stronger orgasms, and more affectionate behavior afterward. Couples who frequently engage in touch and intimacy often report higher relationship stability, a pattern explained by regular oxytocin release reinforcing their connection. The nickname cuddle hormone captures only part of oxytocin's influence. It is also a hormone of memory, selectively strengthening positive social experiences. When released during intimacy, it helps encode those moments as significant, making them easier to recall and reinforcing desire to repeat them. This is why certain touches or encounters linger in memory, infused with warmth that transcends physical sensation. Oxytocin essentially stamps emotional value onto experience, making sex not only rewarding in the moment, but meaningful in the long run. Oxytocin also interacts with estrogen, which enhances its receptors in the brain. This means that in many women, oxytocin's bonding effects are particularly potent during certain phases of the menstrual cycle. This interaction may have evolutionary roots, ensuring that bonding and intimacy align with times when reproduction is most likely. But oxytocin's role extends far beyond fertility. It is released in every kind of affectionate intimacy, making love and closeness rewarding regardless of reproduction. The calming influence of oxytocin is essential to the sexual experience itself. While adrenaline and dopamine ignite arousal, oxytocin helps maintain comfort and safety, allowing arousal to deepen without overwhelming stress. Trust between partners is critical, and oxytocin biologically underpins that trust. Without it, intimacy might feel risky, tense, or unsafe. With it, the body relaxes into closeness, allowing pleasure to unfold fully. This balance between stimulation and calm is what makes sex more than just mechanics. It becomes connection, an act that bonds minds as much as bodies. In long-term relationships, oxytocin may be the secret to stability. While dopamine-driven desire can fade as novelty diminishes, oxytocin-driven attachment grows stronger with repeated intimacy. Couples who maintain affectionate touch, hugs, hand-holding, gentle caresses, continue to release oxytocin, reinforcing bonds even when raw passion wanes. This explains why relationships often evolve from intense obsession to deep companionship, a shift from dopamine's thrill to oxytocin's security. It is not lesser but different, a chemistry that sustains rather than ignites. Oxytocin is not without complexity. It can amplify social bonding but also social bias. Studies show that oxytocin increases trust toward in-groups but can heighten suspicion toward outsiders. This duality reveals that its evolutionary role was not to make people universally compassionate, but to strengthen bonds within families and tribes, ensuring survival in small groups. In sexuality, this means oxytocin is highly partner-specific, reinforcing attachment to those with whom intimacy is shared. The hormone's purpose is not indiscriminate bonding, but selective loyalty. Medical science is exploring oxytocin as therapy for sexual dysfunction, relationship challenges, and even psychiatric conditions like autism and anxiety disorders. Early results suggest it can enhance intimacy and empathy, but also that its effects depend on context. Administered without supportive environments, oxytocin may not improve connection. This shows that the hormone is not a magic switch, but part of a larger system of trust, behavior, and experience. In natural intimacy, it works seamlessly because the environment aligns with the chemistry, reinforcing safety and closeness. To reflect on your own life is to recognize that oxytocin has been shaping you since birth. It bonded you to your parents, soothed you in childhood embraces, connected you to friends through laughter and touch, and deepened your intimacy in love and sex. Every hug, every kiss, every orgasm carried surges of oxytocin, weaving invisible threads of trust and affection. These threads are not metaphorical, they are biological, molecules binding neurons and altering perception. The warmth you feel in closeness is chemistry, but chemistry that feels like love. Sex feels so good not only because of dopamine's thrill or testosterone's drive, but because oxytocin transforms fleeting pleasure into lasting connection. It turns encounters into bonds, desire into trust, and arousal into intimacy. It ensures that reproduction is not only about survival, but about partnership, care, and cooperation. The cuddle hormone is the glue that holds the human story together, making love more than instinct and sex more than mechanics. It is why intimacy lingers in memory, why closeness feels safe, and why the warmth of another body can quiet fear. Oxytocin is biology's way of reminding us that survival is not only about living, but about living together. Sex is often described as the pursuit of pleasure, yet the boundaries between pleasure and pain are not always clear. What one person experiences as overwhelming bliss may involve sensations that, in another context, would register as uncomfortable or even intolerable. The overlap between pain and pleasure is one of the most fascinating puzzles in human biology, a paradox written into the nervous system itself. Nerves that carry signals of heat, pressure, and intensity sometimes fire in ways that blur categories, and the brain interprets them not as suffering, but as ecstasy. This paradox is part of why sex can feel so consuming, why intensity amplifies sensation, and why discomfort can sometimes tip into pleasure. To understand this paradox, you have to begin with the nerves themselves. The human body contains specialized sensory fibers for touch, temperature, and pain. A-beta fibers carry light touch, vibration, and pressure, while C fibers and A delta fibers carry pain and temperature. Yet these systems are not isolated. They converge in the spinal cord and brain, where signals are integrated, filtered, and interpreted. This means the same stimulus can activate multiple fibers at once. A firm grip, for instance, may stimulate both pressure-sensitive and pain-sensitive nerves. The brain then has to decide what to make of the signal. Is this dangerous, or is it rewarding? In moments of arousal, when the brain is flooded with dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins, the interpretation often shifts toward pleasure. Endorphins play a critical role here. These natural opioids released during exercise, laughter, and sex dampen pain pathways while enhancing reward pathways. When intensity rises to the point of discomfort, endorphins flood the nervous system, dulling the sharpness of pain and transforming it into warmth, pressure, or release. This chemical cushioning allows experiences that might otherwise feel overwhelming to instead register as intensely pleasurable. The paradox is not that pain becomes pleasure, but that pain signals are reframed by chemistry, muted in some areas and amplified in others, producing sensations that feel powerful rather than threatening. Another factor is the role of the brain's limbic system, which processes both emotion and pain. The amygdala and anterior cingulate cortex respond not just to the presence of pain, but to its context and meaning. A bruise from an accident is unpleasant because it signals harm, while a similar sensation in intimacy may feel thrilling because the brain reads it differently. Context alters perception. Neuroimaging studies show that when pain is associated with positive outcomes, like intimacy or bonding, the brain's reward circuits activate alongside pain circuits, blending the two into a unique hybrid of sensation. The overlap between pain and pleasure is also rooted in evolutionary biology. Intense sensations, even those bordering on discomfort, draw attention and focus. They keep individuals engaged in the act, ensuring reproduction is not ignored. By making intensity rewarding, evolution created a system where sex would be pursued even when physically taxing. This may explain why sexual activity often involves elevated heart rate, muscle fatigue, and vigorous movement, sensations that in other settings could feel unpleasant, but during arousal feel rewarding. The paradox ensures that the threshold for what counts as too much shifts in the right context. There is also evidence that certain nerve endings are tuned specifically for erogenous intensity. In genital tissues, nerve density is extremely high, and some fibers respond to pressure levels that overlap with discomfort. These same fibers, when activated during arousal, send signals that the brain interprets as intensely pleasurable. This overlap creates the potential for paradox. The same nerve pathway that could signal pain in one situation becomes the source of ecstasy in another. The spinal cord plays a crucial role in mediating these signals. Pain and pleasure pathways both ascend through overlapping tracts, particularly the spinothalamic tract. Within the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, inhibitory neurons can suppress or amplify incoming signals, depending on context. During arousal, descending pathways from the brain release serotonin and norepinephrine that modulate these circuits, dampening pain while preserving intensity. This fine-tuned modulation allows the body to experience sensations that skirt the edge of discomfort without tipping into suffering. It is a dynamic system, constantly adjusting thresholds based on state of arousal, hormone levels, and expectation. Expectation itself is powerful. The brain anticipates sensation and adjusts accordingly. When intensity is expected in the context of sex, the nervous system primes itself to interpret the signals positively. Anticipation triggers dopamine release, sharpening focus and lowering the perception of pain. This is why the same stimulus can feel unbearable in one context, but deeply pleasurable in another. The paradox is not purely physiological, it is cognitive. The meaning assigned to sensation alters its quality. Endorphins are not the only chemicals at play. Oxytocin, released during intimacy, reduces fear and increases trust, making intense sensations feel safe. Dopamine, surging during anticipation, reframes intensity as reward. Together, these chemicals create a neurochemical environment where discomfort is softened and intensity is magnified as thrilling. Pain and pleasure overlap because the brain is designed to blend them when it serves reproductive success and bonding. The pain-pleasure paradox also explains why sex can produce afterglow feelings of both euphoria and exhaustion. Muscles may ache, skin may feel sensitive, and yet the overall impression is positive. The endorphins and oxytocin released during climax linger, masking discomfort and reinforcing the memory of pleasure. The brain encodes the experience as rewarding, ensuring motivation to repeat it despite any temporary physical strain. This encoding is critical. If sex were remembered as exhausting or painful, motivation would dwindle. Instead, the paradox ensures it is recalled as ecstasy. Clinical evidence reinforces this paradox. Some individuals report orgasm triggered by stimulation that borders on discomfort, showing that the overlap is not incidental, but fundamental. Pain disorders, such as fibromyalgia, can alter sexual response by making the nervous system hypersensitive, blurring the line further. Conversely, endorphin deficiencies can reduce the ability to experience pleasure, confirming their role in reframing pain. Even in animal studies, researchers observe that mating behaviors often involve vigorous activity that could cause strain, yet the animals repeat them, proof that biology has built intensity into reward systems. From a psychological perspective, the paradox is also tied to the brain's need for novelty. Intense or unusual sensations capture attention more than predictable ones. This stimulation keeps sexual activity engaging, preventing it from becoming monotonous. By making intensity rewarding, even when it overlaps with discomfort, the nervous system ensures that sex remains compelling across time. Novelty and intensity fuel dopamine, while endorphins ensure that the body does not interpret the intensity as harm. The paradox is not just about nerve overlap, but about motivation, ensuring pleasure stays powerful. Evolutionary history offers clues as well. Early humans who found sex rewarding, even when physically demanding, were more likely to reproduce. Those who avoided it because of discomfort may have left fewer descendants. Over generations, natural selection favored nervous systems that blended pain and pleasure, that turned intensity into reward. Today, the paradox lives in every nerve fiber, every endorphin release, every flush of skin during arousal. It is not an accident, but a strategy, a design that transformed survival into passion. When you reflect on your own body, you realize that every sensation you feel in intimacy is filtered, reframed and amplified by this paradox. The quickened pulse, the warmth of flushed skin, the muscle ache afterward, all could be unpleasant in another setting. But in arousal, they are interpreted as proof of intensity, as signals of passion. The brain weaves them into a tapestry of pleasure, reminding you that survival and joy are intertwined. Sex feels so good not only because of dopamine, oxytocin, or testosterone, but because the nervous system has blurred the line between pain and pleasure. It makes intensity addictive, discomfort rewarding, and effort ecstatic. The paradox ensures that what could have been a fragile, easily abandoned act becomes irresistible, unforgettable, and repeated. It is why sex is not merely biology, but experience, not merely reproduction, but ecstasy. The pain-pleasure paradox is the hidden secret in the nervous system, the reason intensity feels so good, and the reason humanity continues to seek connection at the edge of sensation. Sex is not a frozen moment. It is movement, rhythm, and flow. The body is not designed to remain still during intimacy, but to shift, press, release, and repeat. Every beat of the heart, every breath drawn deeper, every contraction of muscle adds to the experience. Rhythm and motion transform sex from isolated touches into a coordinated performance, one that involves two nervous systems, two bodies, and often two minds syncing together. This synchrony is part of why sex feels so good. It is not just what happens, but how it happens. The tempo, the timing, the way motion builds anticipation and then delivers release. Movement begins with the most fundamental rhythm, the heartbeat. Arousal elevates cardiac output, raising pulse and blood pressure. Each beat pushes more blood into sensitive tissues, engorging them, increasing friction and amplifying sensation. The thump of the heart is not only background, but active participant, matching itself to the tempo of arousal. The faster the rhythm, the more oxygen is delivered to the brain and muscles, fueling the energy of movement. The body interprets this quickening as intensity, layering the pleasure of touch with the physiological rush of circulation. In this way, the cardiovascular system sets the tempo, beating like a drum that the rest of the body follows. Breathing joins in, another rhythm woven into the fabric of intimacy. In the beginning, breaths may be slow, deliberate, even held in anticipation. As arousal builds, respiration deepens, drawing in more oxygen. The diaphragm pumps faster, lungs expand wider, and the rhythm of breath syncs with the rhythm of movement. Quickened breathing mirrors the pace of stimulation, rising and falling in waves. The climax often arrives alongside rapid bursts of breath, sometimes with involuntary cries, followed by long, slow exhales in the aftermath. Breathing not only sustains the body, but enhances sensation by altering carbon dioxide levels, modulating brain activity, and intensifying the perception of urgency. Muscles form the most visible rhythm. Contractions and relaxations, voluntary and involuntary, shape the tempo of intimacy. Pelvic floor muscles tighten, abdominal muscles flex, thighs tense and release. During orgasm, rhythmic contractions occur automatically, pulsed every few seconds, reinforcing the crescendo. These movements are not only reflexive but communicative. Partners read each other's tension, adjust to each other's tempo, and find synchronization. The rhythm of motion creates resonance, a sense of being in tune. Even subtle adjustments, shifts of angle, changes in speed, can amplify or soften sensation, showing how finely the nervous system responds to tempo. The nervous system itself encodes rhythm. Tactile receptors in the skin and genitals respond not only to pressure, but to frequency. Pacinian corpuscles, for example, are highly sensitive to vibration, firing in response to rapid oscillations. These signals travel to the brain, where rhythm is perceived as variation in intensity. A steady tempo builds predictability, while shifts in rhythm introduce novelty. Both are rewarding. Predictability allows tension to rise gradually, while surprise ignites bursts of dopamine, heightening arousal. This interplay between steady beat and variation explains why rhythm and motion are central to the experience. They are not arbitrary, but rooted in how neurons process sensory information. Synchronization between partners magnifies these effects. When two bodies move in rhythm, nervous systems align. Mirror neurons in the brain fire when observing another's movement, creating a sense of shared experience. The brain does not only register one's own actions, but maps the partner's as well, weaving them into a unified perception. This neural mirroring enhances empathy, connection, and coordination. It explains why synchronized motion feels intimate, why partners often describe the sensation as being in sync or moving as one. At a biological level, the nervous system rewards synchronization with stronger dopamine and oxytocin release, reinforcing both pleasure and bonding. Tempo plays a psychological role as well. Slow, deliberate motion fosters anticipation, allowing dopamine to build steadily. Fast, intense motion overwhelms sensory circuits, driving the body toward climax. Alternating tempos creates waves of rising and falling intensity, preventing habituation and sustaining arousal. This manipulation of rhythm is similar to music, where variation keeps the brain engaged and emotional. In fact, studies show that the auditory cortex and motor cortex overlap in processing rhythm, meaning that the body responds to tempo in similar ways, whether it comes from music or from movement itself. This is why sex is often described as a dance, a choreography of tempo and motion. The cerebellum, a brain region responsible for coordination, is deeply involved in this choreography. It integrates signals from muscles, joints, and sensory receptors to smooth motion, prevent awkwardness, and maintain flow. During intimacy, it ensures that movements are fluid, aligned with balance, and capable of adjusting to changes in partners' rhythm. Without the cerebellum, motion would be clumsy, jerky, and uncoordinated. With it, rhythm becomes effortless, allowing the body to focus not on mechanics, but on sensation. Rhythm is also essential for orgasm itself. The rhythmic contractions of pelvic muscles are not random but patterned, occurring at intervals of roughly 0.8 seconds in many individuals. These contractions are triggered by spinal reflexes, sustained by brain activity and reinforced by hormones like oxytocin. The regularity of these pulses is part of what makes climax feel overwhelming, as the body surrenders to an automatic rhythm beyond conscious control. The nervous system essentially conducts its own symphony, contracting and releasing until the peak passes. From an evolutionary standpoint, rhythm and motion serve multiple purposes. Coordinated movement increases the likelihood of successful reproduction, ensuring efficient transfer of genetic material. Synchronization fosters bonding, making partners more likely to remain together for child rearing. Rhythm also prevents desensitization. By varying tempo, partners maintain novelty, keeping arousal high across repeated encounters. These survival benefits explain why rhythm is so deeply wired into the biology of sex. Pleasure is not just a byproduct, but a strategy, rewarding coordinated movement and making synchronization desirable. The pain-pleasure paradox discussed earlier is also tied to rhythm. Repetitive motion, even when intense, can be reframed by the nervous system as rewarding rather than punishing. Endorphins dull discomfort, while dopamine reinforces persistence, allowing the body to endure vigorous activity with pleasure. This overlap shows how rhythm transforms effort into ecstasy, why repetition feels good rather than exhausting in the context of sex. It is biology's way of turning persistence into reward. Clinical research confirms rhythm's role. Vibrational therapy is used to treat sexual dysfunction, relying on rhythmic stimulation to activate nerve pathways. Patients with spinal cord injuries can sometimes experience orgasm through rhythmic patterns of stimulation, even without genital sensation, demonstrating how deeply rhythm is encoded in the nervous system. Likewise, couples who report high satisfaction often describe their intimacy in terms of synchronization, communication, and tempo, rather than mechanics alone. Rhythm is not accessory. It is central to the architecture of sexual pleasure. The cultural dimension of rhythm reinforces this. Music and dance, deeply tied to human sexuality across societies, mimic the tempo and synchronization of intimacy. Drums, chants, and swaying bodies mirror biological rhythms, priming the brain for arousal. These cultural practices exploit the same neural circuits, showing that rhythm is not just biological but symbolic, a language that bridges biology and meaning. Between the beat of a drum and the beat of a heart lies the same principle. Rhythm binds bodies and minds, turning motion into connection. To reflect on your own body is to notice how rhythm shapes your experiences of pleasure. The quickening breath, the pounding heart, the involuntary muscle contractions, These are rhythms as ancient as life itself. The sync with another person, the way motion aligns and builds, is more than choreography. It is biology's design, ensuring that sex is not static but dynamic, not solitary but shared. You feel pleasure not only in touch but in tempo, not only in contact but in synchronization. Sex feels so good because rhythm and motion transform it into something more than mechanics. They create anticipation, amplify sensation, synchronize nervous systems, and bond partners through movement. They turn survival into dance, biology into choreography, instinct into connection. The body's symphony is not only sound, but motion, beating in time with the heart, flowing with the breath, pulsing with the muscles, and resonating with another. Rhythm is the invisible architecture of pleasure, the tempo that turns intimacy into ecstasy. Sex is never only about touch. The body's largest organ, the skin, may dominate arousal, but the other senses, sight, smell, sound, and taste, are woven just as deeply into the experience. Human sexuality is multisensory, a tapestry where each sense contributes a thread, amplifying arousal and layering intimacy with meaning. When people describe encounters as unforgettable, they are rarely remembering touch alone. They recall the look in someone's eyes, the scent of skin, the rhythm of breathing, the taste of a kiss. These sensory details create the fullness of experience, binding memory and emotion to the act. Understanding why sex feels so good requires exploring how every sense participates in the orchestra of arousal and satisfaction. Sight often begins the process. Humans are highly visual creatures, with roughly a third of the brain devoted to processing visual information. Attraction is frequently triggered first by what is seen: faces, posture, movement, symmetry, expression. Evolution sculpted these preferences, favoring visual cues that signaled health, fertility, or strength. But sight in sex is more than biology. It is gaze, eye contact, the subtle dance of expression that communicates interest and connection. Eye contact activates the superior temporal sulcus and amygdala, brain regions tied to emotion and attention, and triggers oxytocin release. This is why looking into someone's eyes during intimacy can deepen closeness and make arousal more intense. Visual stimuli also heighten dopamine release, linking anticipation with reward. Whether it is the movement of a body or the subtle flicker of a smile, sight primes the nervous system, adding richness to sensation. Smell, though often underestimated in modern culture, plays an equally profound role. The olfactory system is directly connected to the limbic system, the brain's center for emotion and memory. Unlike other senses, which are routed through the thalamus, smell travels directly to the amygdala and hippocampus. This is why scent is so evocative, why a fragrance can trigger vivid memories of intimacy long after the fact. In sexual arousal, pheromones, chemical signals released by the body, may subtly influence attraction. Though their role in humans is debated, evidence suggests that natural body odors, shaped by immune system genes, can influence partner preference. Sweat, skin oils, and even breath carry unique chemical signatures that the brain interprets unconsciously. During intimacy, these scents combine with the surge of oxytocin and dopamine, binding the sensory detail of smell to emotional connection. The aroma of a partner becomes inseparable from the memory of closeness, creating a private sensory fingerprint that lingers in memory. Sound adds another layer. The auditory system captures everything from words to whispers, from sighs to rhythm. Voices activate brain regions linked to identity and familiarity, making the sound of a partner uniquely arousing. Auditory cues also reinforce rhythm, syncing bodies together much like music does in dance. During intimacy, breathing, moans, and spoken words provide feedback, signaling arousal and guiding tempo. These sounds are processed in the auditory cortex but also recruit the limbic system, amplifying emotional resonance. Sound heightens arousal by creating an environment where every noise feels charged with meaning. Silence, too, plays a role, sharpening focus on the faintest details, the rustle of sheets, the hitch of breath, the shared rhythm of heartbeats. The auditory sense ensures that intimacy is not just felt, but heard, weaving the atmosphere that surrounds touch. Taste, though the least obvious in sexual experience, completes the multisensory symphony. The gustatory system is tied closely to smell, and together they create the perception of flavor. Kissing engages taste receptors on the tongue, transmitting chemical cues while stimulating thousands of nerve endings in lips and mouth. Saliva carries trace hormones, proteins, and immune markers, subtly informing the body about compatibility and health. From an evolutionary perspective, kissing may have developed as a way to sample these cues, turning taste into a tool of mate assessment. Beyond biology, taste adds intimacy by merging bodies in one of the most personal forms of contact. The sweetness, saltiness, or even faint bitterness of a kiss is bound to memory, anchoring the act in sensory detail. The integration of these senses is what makes sex immersive. The brain does not process sight, smell, sound, and taste separately, but combines them into a unified experience. This integration occurs in the orbitofrontal cortex, a region where sensory pathways converge. Here, visual, olfactory, auditory, and gustatory signals are blended with emotional and reward circuits. The result is a multisensory perception that feels greater than the sum of its parts. A kiss is not just taste and touch. It is also the sound of breath, the sight of closeness, the smell of skin, all fused into a single moment. Without this integration, sex would feel fragmented. With it, the senses amplify each other, magnifying arousal and embedding memory. This multisensory design is also why imagination and memory are so powerful in sexuality. The brain can recall or simulate sights, sounds, smells, and tastes, activating many of the same regions as real experience. Fantasies often include vivid sensory detail because the brain is wired to tie arousal to multisensory input. Memories of a partner's scent or the sound of a voice can trigger arousal long after the moment, showing how deeply these senses are encoded. The hippocampus and amygdala stamp these sensory cues with emotional significance, ensuring they linger and resurface. Desire, then, is not only about the present, but also about the remembered sensory richness of the past. Evolutionary history explains why the senses are so intertwined with sex. Animals rely heavily on sensory cues for reproduction, pheromones in insects, visual displays in birds, vocal calls in mammals. Humans inherited this reliance but layered it with complex brain integration. Visual beauty, olfactory cues, auditory signals, and gustatory intimacy all combine to reinforce attraction and bonding. By making sex multisensory, evolution ensured that it would be compelling, memorable, and repeated. Each sense adds redundancy, guaranteeing that arousal is triggered even if one pathway is muted. The result is resilience, a system that does not depend on one sense but on all working together. Clinical research confirms the importance of multisensory input. Loss of smell, for example, can reduce sexual desire and satisfaction, demonstrating how critical olfaction is to arousal. Hearing impairments can alter communication during intimacy, affecting rhythm and connection. Visual impairments may limit certain cues, but often enhance sensitivity to touch and sound, showing the adaptability of the system. These findings highlight that while touch dominates, the other senses are not optional. They are integral to the full experience. Culture also shapes how these senses are emphasized. Perfume, lingerie, music, candlelight dinners, these are not arbitrary rituals, but deliberate activations of sight, smell, sound, and taste. Societies have long amplified sensory cues to enhance attraction, from scented oils in ancient Egypt to love songs in medieval courts. These cultural practices exploit the same neural circuits that biology built, intensifying arousal through multisensory stimulation. Humans may not consciously link perfume or music to brain chemistry, but the body responds all the same. The cultural layers reinforce the biological, ensuring that sex is not only natural, but also enriched by human creativity. To reflect on your own experiences is to see how multisensory sex truly is. The memory of a look, the scent of skin, the sound of laughter, the taste of a kiss, these linger long after the act itself. They are stored not just as isolated details but as part of a whole, encoded by the orbitofrontal cortex and stamped by dopamine and oxytocin as rewarding. The senses make sex unforgettable, turning biology into memory and memory into desire. Sex feels so good, not because of one sense alone, but because all senses converge. Sight excites, smell binds, sound amplifies, taste personalizes. Together, they create immersion, the sense of being surrounded, engulfed, consumed. The role of the senses is not accessory, but essential, transforming reproduction into ecstasy and intimacy into connection. In the orchestra of sex, touch may be the lead, but the other senses are instruments playing just as powerfully. Their harmony is what makes the music unforgettable, the reason sex feels like more than survival. It feels like living in every sense at once. Climax is one of the strangest and most explosive experiences in human biology. A moment that lasts only seconds can feel larger than life, overwhelming and transformative. It is the pinnacle of sexual pleasure, but also a physiological mystery that science is still piecing together. Why does orgasm feel so powerful? Why does it vary so dramatically between people? And how does a simple reflex become an experience that humans describe with words like transcendence, explosion, or release? To answer those questions, we must look closely at the nerves, muscles, hormones, and brain regions that come together during climax, and at the evolutionary logic that made such an extreme experience part of the human story. The process begins with arousal, a gradual build-up that primes the body for climax. Touch, anticipation, and imagination trigger the release of dopamine, oxytocin, and nitric oxide, increasing blood flow to genital tissues and heightening sensitivity. As stimulation continues, signals from nerve endings travel through the spinal cord into the brain, intensifying the feedback loop. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, usually opposed, now work in tandem. The parasympathetic branch drives engorgement and lubrication, while the sympathetic branch builds tension and prepares muscles for contraction. This dual activity creates a sense of mounting urgency, a pressure that cannot be ignored. Orgasm is the release valve, the point at which all that built-up activity is discharged in a rapid cascade. Physically, orgasm is marked by rhythmic muscle contractions. In males, contractions occur in the pelvic floor, prostate, vas deferens, and urethra, propelling semen outward in ejaculation. In females, contractions ripple through the pelvic floor, vagina, and uterus, creating waves of tightening and release. These contractions occur at predictable intervals, often every 0.8 seconds, lasting for several seconds before gradually tapering off. Though the mechanics differ, the basic pattern is the same. Muscles fire in coordinated bursts, driven by reflexes in the spinal cord. These contractions not only serve reproductive purposes, but also intensify sensation, reinforcing the experience with physical rhythm. The brain, however, is where orgasm becomes more than reflex. Neuroimaging studies show that during climax, nearly every region of the brain activates. The limbic system, which governs emotion, flares. The hypothalamus and brainstem release oxytocin and vasopressin in surges. The nucleus accumbens floods with dopamine, producing euphoria. The prefrontal cortex, usually responsible for judgment and self-control, temporarily shuts down, creating a sense of surrender or loss of self. The insula heightens body awareness, making every contraction feel magnified. The cerebellum coordinates motion, while the hippocampus stamps the event into memory. Orgasm is not just one brain event, it is an all-brain event, a storm of activity that explains why it feels so overwhelming. Endorphins, the body's natural opioids, are also released in abundance. They dull pain, reduce stress, and create a floating sense of bliss. Prolactin surges afterward, contributing to the refractory period in males, during which arousal is temporarily suppressed. In females, prolactin also rises, but does not always block further orgasms, which may explain why some women experience multiple climaxes in succession. This hormonal aftershock leaves the body calm, relaxed, and sometimes drowsy, explaining the so-called afterglow. The chemical storm is as important as the contractions, ensuring that climax is not only intense in the moment, but soothing afterward, reinforcing the memory as positive and desirable. The variability of orgasm between individuals adds to its puzzle. Some experience it frequently and easily, others rarely or with difficulty. Factors include nerve sensitivity, hormone levels, psychological state, and cultural conditioning. Anxiety, distraction, or trauma can inhibit the reflex by activating the prefrontal cortex and amygdala, blocking the surrender required for climax. Conversely, trust, safety, and relaxation enhance the likelihood by quieting inhibition. Even anatomy plays a role. Differences in nerve distribution, blood flow, or tissue responsiveness can alter intensity. What science shows clearly is that orgasm is not simply mechanical, but a complex interplay of mind, body, and environment. Another mystery is why orgasm exists in the first place. For males, the reproductive purpose is straightforward. Ejaculation delivers sperm to fertilize an egg. For females, the evolutionary logic is less clear. Some theories suggest orgasm helps by drawing sperm upward through uterine contractions. Others argue it strengthens pair bonding, increasing the chances of cooperative parenting. Still others see it as a byproduct of shared developmental pathways between the sexes. Whatever its origins, the persistence of orgasm across human history suggests it has provided significant evolutionary advantage, whether through reproduction, bonding, or motivation to seek sex repeatedly. Orgasm also varies in intensity and quality. Some describe it as localized, focused in the genitals, while others report full-body waves that seem to radiate outward. This variation reflects differences in how the nervous system integrates sensory input. In some, contractions dominate the experience, while in others, brain chemistry creates a sense of expansiveness or transcendence. Cultural expectations and personal psychology also shape perception. In societies where sexuality is celebrated, people may report richer experiences than in those where it is stigmatized. Orgasm is both universal and deeply individual, a shared reflex colored by unique brains and bodies. Multiple orgasms add another layer to the puzzle. Some individuals, especially women, can experience repeated climaxes without a refractory period. This is likely due to differences in prolactin response, as well as the ability of their nervous system to sustain arousal without inhibition. For others, especially most men, prolactin enforces a refractory period, requiring time before arousal can rebuild. This difference has intrigued scientists for decades, highlighting how sexual biology varies across individuals and why orgasm is not a uniform event. Neuroscience has even identified brain orgasms, moments of climax triggered without direct genital stimulation. Intense mental imagery, fantasy, or even meditation can activate the same circuits, leading to physical orgasm. This demonstrates how powerfully the brain drives the experience, capable of producing climax without mechanical input. It also explains why sexual dreams can feel vividly real, leaving the body with all the hallmarks of orgasm upon waking. These phenomena show that climax is as much psychological as physical. a creation of the nervous system rather than just the reproductive organs. The subjective descriptions of orgasm, explosion, wave, surrender, are attempts to capture the reality of this total body event. It is at once muscular, chemical, neurological, and emotional. The paradox is that something so short in duration can feel so expansive, as if time dilates. The prefrontal cortex's shutdown may explain this, silencing the brain's usual timekeeping and self-awareness. In those moments, the sense of self dissolves into sensation, leaving memory of timelessness. This helps explain why orgasm is often described as spiritual or transcendent, even by those who understand its mechanics. Orgasm is also deeply tied to bonding. The surge of oxytocin and vasopressin during climax strengthens emotional connection with a partner. This chemistry reinforces pair bonding, making partners more likely to remain together and care for offspring. From an evolutionary perspective, this is critical. Pleasure ensures reproduction, bonding ensures survival. Orgasm is not only reward for sex, but also reinforcement of relationships, linking ecstasy with trust. The puzzle is not just why it feels good, but why it feels meaningful, as if it matters beyond the moment. Clinical challenges with orgasm reveal its complexity. Anorgasmia, or difficulty reaching climax, can stem from hormonal imbalance, nerve damage, psychological barriers, or medications that alter neurotransmitters. Treatments range from adjusting hormones to therapy that reduces anxiety or trauma. These cases show that orgasm depends on a delicate balance of factors, easily disrupted but also capable of being restored. They also highlight that orgasm is not guaranteed, reminding us that while it may be universal in design, it is highly individual in expression. From a broader perspective, orgasm demonstrates how evolution intertwined survival with joy. By making climax explosive and unforgettable, biology ensured sex would be irresistible. Without the rush of dopamine, the flood of oxytocin, the waves of muscle contractions, and the afterglow of endorphins, reproduction might have been neglected. Instead, orgasm became one of the most compelling experiences in human life. Repeated across cultures, remembered for lifetimes, and described in endless metaphors. Its power lies in its ability to unify body and brain, sensation and meaning, survival and pleasure. To reflect on your own existence is to realize that you are alive because of orgasm. Somewhere in the past, two nervous systems converged. Their muscles contracted, their brains lit up with dopamine and oxytocin, their bodies surrendered to reflex. That brief explosion carried forward the chain of life, leading eventually to you. Every human alive today is proof of the orgasm puzzle, a living testament to a moment that is at once universal and endlessly varied. Sex feels so good because orgasm crowns the experience with intensity, transforming reproduction into ecstasy. It is a reflex and a mystery, a contraction and a transcendence, a puzzle that science can map but never fully capture. What happens in those seconds is more than biology. It is life's way of ensuring its own continuation by making the act unforgettable. The orgasm puzzle is not only about how climax works, but about why it feels so explosively good, why it matters so deeply, and why it remains one of the most extraordinary experiences the human body and brain can produce. When you step back from the details of nerves, muscles, and chemistry, a larger picture emerges, one that stretches across millions of years. The reason sex feels so good is not random indulgence, but a strategy shaped by evolution itself. Pleasure was the jackpot nature discovered, the winning formula that guaranteed reproduction, fostered bonding, and encouraged cooperation within groups. By making intimacy irresistible, biology solved the most important problem life ever faced: how to keep itself going. The human experience of sexual pleasure is, in this sense, the echo of survival's most brilliant invention. The simplest truth of biology is that life must reproduce to continue. Single-celled organisms divided, plants released pollen, insects carried genetic material from one flower to another. But as organisms became more complex, so did reproduction. It required effort, risk, and cooperation. For animals that relied on sexual reproduction, finding a mate was no small task. It meant competing, signaling, waiting for the right season. Without a strong incentive, many individuals might have avoided the effort altogether. Evolution solved this by wiring sex directly to the brain's reward system, ensuring that the drive to reproduce was not a burden, but a craving. Those who felt pleasure were more likely to seek sex often, leaving more offspring, passing the trait forward. Over generations, pleasure became inseparable from reproduction. For humans, this connection is amplified. Dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins, and hormones like testosterone and estrogen make sex feel not only pleasurable, but compelling. The desire does not fade quickly, and the reward is so memorable that it drives repetition. This persistence is what kept populations thriving. Reproduction became inevitable not through obligation, but through delight. The evolutionary jackpot was not only survival, but the transformation of survival into joy. Each person alive today is proof that this system worked, that ancestors were drawn to each other by pleasure, strong enough to overcome risk and hardship. The jackpot did not stop at reproduction. Sex also created bonds. In humans, raising children is a long and resource-heavy task. Infants are helpless for years, requiring food, protection, and teaching. A single parent would have struggled in the harsh environments of prehistory. Pair bonds, strengthened through the chemistry of intimacy, increased the odds of survival. Oxytocin, released during sex, bonded partners emotionally, making them more likely to cooperate. Dopamine reinforced closeness by rewarding repeated intimacy. The afterglow of sex was not just satisfaction, but glue, keeping partners together long enough to raise offspring. In this way, pleasure became more than reproductive. It became relational. The evolutionary jackpot ensured not only that babies were born, but that they were cared for. Cooperation extended beyond pairs. In early human groups, alliances mattered. Sharing food, defending territory, and raising children required trust. Sexual bonds helped create networks of loyalty. Intimacy strengthened partnerships not only for reproduction, but for survival in community. Anthropologists argue that the pleasure of sex contributed to social cohesion, encouraging cooperation beyond the immediate family. The same oxytocin that bonded couples also fostered trust in groups, making human tribes more stable. The jackpot, then, was not only individual survival, but collective survival, amplified by the chemistry of closeness. The role of pleasure in evolution becomes clearer when you consider what might have happened without it. If reproduction were painful or neutral, individuals might have avoided it, populations might have dwindled, and species might have disappeared. Pleasure guaranteed that reproduction happened often and reliably. But it also gave humanity something extra: flexibility. Sex became not only about reproduction, but also about play, intimacy, and social bonding. Because it felt good, people sought it even when reproduction was not guaranteed. This created stronger emotional ties, more cohesive groups, and a deeper layer of cooperation. The jackpot was bigger than biology expected. Pleasure did not only ensure life continued, it enhanced the quality of that life. Cultural evolution built on this foundation. Across societies, sex became enmeshed with ritual, art, and storytelling. Myths, dances, and ceremonies often celebrated fertility, intimacy, and pleasure. These cultural layers reinforced the biological rewards, creating traditions that encouraged bonding and reproduction. The link between sex and pleasure became part of the human imagination, shaping identity, relationships, and even spirituality. Pleasure became not just a mechanism, but a symbol, woven into the very fabric of culture. Science today confirms just how critical this evolutionary design was. Brain imaging shows that sexual pleasure activates the same reward circuits as food, music, and achievement, but with greater intensity. Hormonal studies reveal how oxytocin and vasopressin strengthen pair bonds after intimacy. Anthropological evidence shows that societies with stronger cooperative bonds had higher survival rates. All of this points to the same conclusion. The pleasure of sex was not incidental, but central to the success of the species. Without it, humanity's story might have ended early. With it, humans not only survived, but thrived, building families, communities, and civilizations. Variations in orgasm and pleasure also fit into this evolutionary logic. While not everyone experiences climax the same way, the overall design ensures that enough people are motivated by sex to keep reproduction consistent. Some researchers suggest female orgasm may serve functions beyond reproduction, such as bonding or mate selection. Even variability itself may be advantageous, ensuring that sexual expression is diverse, adaptable, and resilient. The jackpot was not in perfection, but in flexibility, making pleasure a robust and enduring incentive. The evolutionary jackpot also explains why sex dominates human thought. The reward prediction error principle of dopamine means that the brain craves novelty and anticipation. This keeps desire alive, ensuring people do not lose interest too quickly. It is why flirtation, seduction, and anticipation feel so intoxicating. Evolution engineered the mind to chase the thrill, because chasing ensured reproduction. What might seem like obsession in the modern world was once survival strategy. Pleasure, craving, and anticipation were all part of the same package deal. When you reflect on your own existence, the scale of this jackpot becomes humbling. You are alive because ancestors felt pleasure strong enough to bond, to cooperate, to raise children together, to survive as communities. Every cell in your body is a descendant of that chemistry, carried forward through countless generations of joy and intimacy. Without the pleasure of sex, there would be no humanity, no culture, no memory, no future. What feels like personal ecstasy is actually the echo of life's deepest design. Sex feels so good because evolution demanded that it must. It is the ultimate jackpot, the discovery that survival is best guaranteed not by force or duty, but by reward. Pleasure ensured reproduction, bonding ensured child-rearing, cooperation ensured survival of groups. Together, these forces shaped the trajectory of the species, making humanity not only successful, but deeply interconnected. The jackpot was more than life continuing. It was life enriched, colored with intimacy, trust, and love. Every climax, every embrace, every memory of closeness is part of that inheritance, proof that biology found its greatest trick in making survival indistinguishable from joy. For all of its intensity, beauty, and evolutionary power, sexual pleasure is not guaranteed. Desire can fade, arousal can feel muted, and climax can remain elusive. Many people, at some point in their lives, encounter moments when the chemistry does not flow as it should, when the fire of dopamine feels dim or the bond of oxytocin does not hold. The absence of pleasure can be frustrating, confusing, even frightening, because it feels like the body is turning away from one of its most ancient and rewarding drives. Understanding why pleasure sometimes goes missing is not only a matter of sexual health, but of human well-being. Because desire, satisfaction, and intimacy are deeply tied to identity, self-confidence, and relationships. Low libido is one of the most common challenges. Libido is the baseline drive for sex, fueled by testosterone, estrogen, dopamine, and psychological anticipation. When it wanes, it can feel like attraction has been switched off. Hormonal changes often play a role. Testosterone levels can decline with age, illness, or certain medications, leading to reduced desire in both men and women. Estrogen fluctuations during menopause can change lubrication and sensitivity, dampening arousal. Progesterone surges may suppress interest at certain times in the menstrual cycle. Even thyroid disorders can affect libido by altering metabolism and energy. These are not character flaws or failures of attraction, but biological shifts that influence chemistry. Stress is another powerful thief of pleasure. Cortisol, the stress hormone, competes directly with sex hormones, suppressing their production and blunting their effects. Chronic stress floods the body with cortisol, which dampens dopamine release, narrows blood flow, and keeps the nervous system in a state of vigilance rather than relaxation. Sex requires trust and surrender, but stress keeps the brain scanning for danger, unable to let go. This is why anxiety, workload, financial strain, or unresolved conflict can drain sexual energy. The body prioritizes survival over reproduction in times of stress, and pleasure is the first casualty. Depression and mental health conditions also steal pleasure. Serotonin imbalances can reduce libido, while the very nature of depression suppresses motivation and enjoyment, a symptom known as anhedonia. Medications used to treat depression, such as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, can further complicate matters, sometimes delaying or blocking orgasm. The brain that should light up with dopamine and oxytocin during intimacy may remain flat, unresponsive. This can create a cycle of frustration, where the absence of pleasure deepens sadness, which in turn makes pleasure even harder to reach. Medical conditions can alter sexual function as well. Diabetes can damage small blood vessels and nerves, reducing sensitivity and impairing blood flow. Cardiovascular disease can make arousal physically difficult, as circulation is essential for engorgement and lubrication. Neurological disorders, such as multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, disrupt the communication between brain and body, changing the way signals are transmitted. Pelvic surgeries, injuries, or scarring can alter anatomy and nerve pathways. Even chronic pain can make intimacy difficult, turning what should be pleasure into strain. These conditions remind us how delicate the balance is between body and mind, chemistry and structure. Relationship dynamics also matter. Emotional distance, unresolved conflict, or lack of trust can suppress desire, even when the body is otherwise healthy. The brain's limbic system, which processes both threat and intimacy, cannot easily separate emotional safety from physical arousal. If trust is damaged, oxytocin release diminishes and the chemistry of bonding falters. This is why couples therapy often improves sexual satisfaction, not because it directly changes hormones, but because it restores the trust and communication that allow hormones to flow naturally. Pleasure is not only about nerves and vessels, but about the context in which those signals are received. Age changes the landscape of pleasure in predictable ways. Men often experience erectile difficulties as vascular elasticity decreases, while women may encounter vaginal dryness or thinning tissues after menopause. Yet age does not erase the capacity for sexual joy. Many older adults report deeply satisfying intimacy, even with altered physiology. The key is adaptation. New rhythms, different types of touch, and sometimes medical support such as hormone replacement or lubricants. The absence of one form of pleasure can lead to the discovery of another, showing that sexuality is not a single script, but a flexible, evolving story. Cultural pressures and stigma can also silence desire. Messages that label sex as shameful, sinful, or inappropriate can lodge deeply in the mind, interfering with arousal even years later. Trauma, particularly sexual trauma, can trigger the amygdala to associate intimacy with fear, blocking the release of oxytocin and dopamine. Healing in these cases is gradual, requiring therapy, safety, and patience to retrain the brain to interpret intimacy as safe again. These challenges show that pleasure is not just biology, but lived experience, shaped by culture, memory, and history. The absence of pleasure matters because sexuality is not a luxury, but a fundamental aspect of health. Intimacy reduces stress, strengthens immune function, lowers blood pressure, and increases life satisfaction. When pleasure is missing, people may feel isolated, inadequate, or disconnected. Relationships may suffer, self-esteem may erode, and overall well-being may decline. The World Health Organization recognizes sexual health as essential to human health for this reason. It is not frivolous, but foundational. Solutions exist, though they require patience and understanding. For hormonal imbalances, medical interventions such as hormone replacement therapy or adjustments to medication can restore libido. For stress, relaxation techniques, therapy, or lifestyle changes can lower cortisol and reopen the pathways to arousal. For depression, treatments must balance mental health with sexual side effects, sometimes using medications that preserve libido. For medical conditions, targeted therapies can restore function or provide new ways to experience intimacy. For relational issues, communication and trust building are as powerful as any prescription. Each solution works not by creating pleasure from nothing, but by clearing the obstacles that block biology from doing what it was designed to do. Science also shows that even when pleasure is muted, intimacy itself can be healing. Touch releases oxytocin even without climax, reducing stress and fostering connection. Cuddling, kissing, and holding hands still activate bonding pathways, reminding the nervous system that closeness is safe and rewarding. In this sense, pleasure is not all or nothing but exists on a spectrum. Even when orgasm is absent, intimacy can still nourish body and mind, offering comfort, trust, and calm. To reflect on your own life is to acknowledge that there may be seasons when pleasure flows easily and seasons when it falters. The absence of desire is not the end of sexuality, but a signal that something in the body, mind, or environment needs care. Stress, illness, or age may dim the flame, but the capacity for closeness remains. The nervous system is adaptable, capable of finding new paths to satisfaction if given the right support. Sex feels so good in part because it was designed to keep life moving forward, but when pleasure goes missing, it reminds us of the delicate balance that makes that design possible. It shows us how fragile yet resilient the system is, how deeply intimacy depends on health, trust, and chemistry. The absence of pleasure matters because it reveals just how important it is, not only for reproduction but for joy, connection, and survival itself. The puzzle is not why sex feels good, but how to restore it when it does not. And the answer, more often than not, lies not in forcing desire, but in tending carefully to the body and mind until they are ready once more to let pleasure return. For most of the natural world, sex is simple. Two organisms meet, genetic material is exchanged, and the species continues. Yet for humans, sex long ago became something more than reproduction. It became connection, creativity, play, and meaning. It grew into a force that shaped art, culture, relationships, and even identity. The paradox of human sexuality is that while it remains biology at its core, it has expanded far beyond survival into realms of expression and imagination. To understand why sex feels so good is to see that it was never only about passing on genes. It is also about bonding, joy, and the shared experience of being alive. The evolutionary roots of this expansion lie in the chemistry of pleasure. If sex had been designed solely for reproduction, it could have been brief, mechanical, and detached. Instead, evolution laced it with dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins, making it intoxicating and memorable. This made reproduction more likely, but it also left space for sex to serve additional purposes. Pleasure does not discriminate between fertile and infertile times, between reproductive and non-reproductive acts. The reward circuitry fires regardless, opening the door for sex to become a way of strengthening pair bonds, exploring intimacy, and creating playfulness. The body's wiring made sex too compelling to be limited to reproduction alone. Connection is the most immediate expansion. Sexual intimacy strengthens emotional bonds through chemistry and psychology. Oxytocin released during closeness fosters trust, safety, and attachment. Dopamine reinforces the memory of connection, making partners crave each other again. Over time, this chemistry builds relationships that are not only about reproduction, but about companionship and loyalty. In early human societies, these bonds increased survival by ensuring cooperative parenting and resource sharing. Today, they provide emotional security, stability, and love. Sex is a language of connection, one that communicates care and closeness even when no children are conceived. Creativity is another layer. Human sexuality is astonishingly diverse, expressed in rituals, art, literature, and music across cultures. From fertility dances to love poetry, from sculptures to novels, sex has inspired imagination for millennia. The very intensity of sexual pleasure made it a natural subject for creative expression. Dopamine, which fuels desire, also fuels creativity, stimulating curiosity and exploration. Many of the world's great myths, epics, and artistic masterpieces intertwine with themes of love and intimacy. Sex became not just an act, but a muse, inspiring humanity to explore the depths of meaning in pleasure. Playfulness is equally central. Unlike many animals that mate only during fertile periods, humans seek intimacy throughout the year, across the lifespan, and often without reproductive intention. This flexibility means sex can be playful, exploratory, and inventive. The body rewards intimacy with pleasure regardless of timing, allowing couples to experiment, laugh, and discover together. This play strengthens bonds by reducing stress, releasing endorphins, and reminding partners that intimacy can be joy as much as intensity. Play turns survival into recreation, proof that evolution gave humans more than duty. It gave them delight. The expansion of sex beyond reproduction also explains why it is so deeply tied to identity. Sexuality shapes how people see themselves and how they connect to others. Attraction, orientation, and expression are not only about biological function, but about who a person is and how they relate to the world. This is possible because the brain does not treat sex as a narrow reflex, but as an experience woven with imagination, memory, and meaning. The prefrontal cortex overlays values, beliefs, and stories onto desire, transforming biology into identity. For some, sex is central to self-expression. For others, it plays a quieter role. In either case, it carries significance far beyond genes. From an anthropological perspective, sex also became a tool for social cohesion. In many cultures, sexual relationships formed alliances, strengthened kinship, or sealed treaties. Even casual intimacy could foster goodwill and trust within groups. By making sex rewarding beyond reproduction, evolution ensured it could serve as a glue in social structures. The cooperation that allowed humans to build villages, cities, and civilizations was in part supported by the chemistry of intimacy. Pleasure was the currency not only of survival, but of community. The brain's plasticity further amplified this expansion. Because pleasure is processed in the reward circuits alongside other enjoyable activities like music, food, and storytelling, sex became interwoven with those activities. A shared meal, a dance, or a story by firelight could all become preludes to intimacy. Over time, cultures ritualize these connections, embedding sex into festivals, courtship traditions, and celebrations. Pleasure spilled outward, making sexuality part of the broader fabric of life rather than a hidden mechanism for reproduction. Science shows just how independent sex has become from reproduction. Contraception allows people to separate intimacy from fertility entirely, yet desire remains just as strong. Couples past reproductive age continue to experience sexual pleasure, confirming that the body rewards intimacy regardless of reproductive outcome. Even individuals who cannot or choose not to have children still find fulfillment in sex, because its purpose has grown larger than passing on genes. The body was designed to crave sex for survival, but culture, imagination, and chemistry elevated it into something essential for happiness. The variability of human sexuality also reflects this expansion. Different cultures, individuals, and times of life produce different expressions of intimacy, from tender affection to adventurous exploration. This diversity is possible because sex is anchored in pleasure rather than strictly in reproduction. As long as it feels rewarding, the nervous system supports it. The jackpot of evolution was not a rigid template, but a flexible system that could adapt to new environments, social norms, and personal preferences. Sex became more than survival. It became adaptable joy. Even in the absence of climax, sex often remains meaningful. Touch, closeness, and emotional connection release oxytocin and endorphins, lowering stress and strengthening bonds. This shows that sex is not a narrow biological function, but a broad emotional landscape. It can provide comfort during grief, reassurance during stress, or celebration during joy. In this way, sex became a tool of resilience, helping humans endure challenges by offering intimacy as solace. Reflecting on your own life, you may see how sex has played roles that have little to do with reproduction. The moments of closeness with a partner, the memory of laughter shared during intimacy, the sense of safety in another's embrace. These are not about passing on genes, but about feeling human. Sex connects people in ways that words sometimes cannot. It creates experiences that linger in memory, shaping relationships and identities. It is one of the few acts that blends biology, emotion, imagination, and culture into a single whole. Sex feels so good because it had to for survival, but it stays meaningful because it became more than survival. It became a language of love, a spark of creativity, a form of play, and a source of connection. It reminds humanity that life is not only about continuing, but about living richly, deeply, and together. The evolutionary jackpot was pleasure, but the cultural jackpot was everything built on top of it. Trust, art, intimacy, joy. Reproduction may have been the beginning, but connection, creativity, and play made sexuality one of the most extraordinary dimensions of being human. Science has mapped the nerves, tracked the hormones, and scanned the brain. We know about dopamine flooding the nucleus accumbens, oxytocin binding partners through trust, testosterone fueling libido, and endorphins softening the edges of intensity. We know about muscles contracting at intervals, vessels swelling with blood, skin alive with receptors. We know about the prefrontal cortex dimming during orgasm, the amygdala quieting with safety, the cerebellum smoothing movement into rhythm. We can describe the choreography of chemistry and circuitry in astonishing detail. And yet, even with all this knowledge, one truth remains. The joy of sex cannot be fully reduced to biology. It is a universal mystery, an experience that science can explain piece by piece but never capture as a whole. The puzzle begins with the scale of the experience. Climax lasts only seconds, yet it is remembered for years. Touch on the skin lasts moments, yet the memory of it lingers for a lifetime. The biology is transient, but the meaning is enduring. This disconnect between duration and memory suggests that sex is not only about reflexes, but about something deeper, something encoded in identity, culture, and imagination. Science can point to the hippocampus and amygdala stamping sexual memory as significant, but it cannot fully explain why some moments of intimacy are remembered with an intensity that surpasses any other experience. Pleasure itself defies easy explanation. Why should the friction of skin on skin feel transcendent? Why should contractions of muscle feel like waves of joy rather than just motion? Why should dopamine and oxytocin combine into something that feels like love rather than just chemistry? Science can describe the mechanisms, but not the subjective experience. The mystery lies in consciousness itself. Sensation is translated into meaning, and meaning becomes experience. Biology provides the script, but the mind creates the theatre, projecting significance onto every signal. Why the mind does this so richly, so powerfully, remains a question larger than neuroscience. Sex is also mysterious because it is never only physical. It is always layered with psychology and intimacy. A kiss is not just pressure and taste. It is also memory, expectation, trust, and context. A touch is not just activation of nerve endings, it is also communication, reassurance, or longing. Intimacy blends biology with story, creating meaning where none existed before. Two people may experience the same act, but one feels ecstasy while another feels emptiness, depending on trust, history, and emotional connection. This variability cannot be reduced to molecules alone. It is proof that sex is as much about minds meeting as bodies joining. Culture further deepens the mystery. Across time and geography, humans have celebrated, constrained, ritualized, and mythologized sex in endless ways. From fertility festivals to vows of chastity, from love songs to laws, societies have layered meaning onto intimacy far beyond reproduction. These cultural scripts influence how sex is felt and remembered, shaping desire through language, art, and story. The brain responds not only to biology, but to symbols, amplifying the richness of the experience. Science can map hormones, but it cannot fully explain why a song, a scent, or a poem can ignite desire. That belongs to the intersection of culture and biology, a place where explanation blurs into wonder. The mystery is also evident in how sex intertwines with love. Chemistry alone cannot explain why a specific person becomes the focus of desire, why one face captivates while another does not, why bonds last for decades with one partner but dissolve quickly with another. Evolutionary biology can suggest patterns, symmetry, fertility cues, compatibility, but these cannot fully account for the complexity of human attraction. Love transforms sex into something larger than pleasure. It creates devotion, sacrifice, and loyalty. It binds people through decades of change, making intimacy not just about dopamine surges, but about shared lives. This dimension, where pleasure and love fuse into meaning, remains one of humanity's most profound mysteries. Spiritual traditions have long recognized this mystery. In many cultures, sex is seen not only as physical, but as sacred, a way to connect with forces larger than the self. Tantric practices, fertility rituals, and sacred marriages all point to the sense that sex is more than mechanics. Even in secular lives, people often describe sex with words that echo spirituality, transcendence, unity, surrender. The shutting down of the prefrontal cortex during climax, the loss of self-awareness, the sense of timelessness, all resemble mystical states. Science can describe the neurobiology of these states, but it cannot fully capture why they feel sacred, why they carry awe. The mystery also resides in diversity. Human sexuality takes countless forms, from gentle affection to adventurous exploration, from long-term companionship to fleeting encounters. No two experiences are identical, and no two people experience desire in exactly the same way. Biology gives a shared foundation, but expression varies endlessly. This variability itself is part of the mystery. Why should one species carry such a vast spectrum of intimacy when most animals follow narrow scripts? Perhaps the answer lies in humanity's unique blend of imagination and culture, but even that does not capture the fullness of the phenomenon. Diversity in sex is not only tolerated, it is celebrated, feared, regulated, and expressed through countless human stories. Science can note the flexibility, but it cannot fully explain why it matters so deeply to identity. When pleasure goes missing, the mystery becomes even clearer. Stress, illness, or trauma can interrupt the chemistry, but the longing for intimacy remains. People yearn for closeness, even when the biology falters. This yearning shows that sex is not reducible to hormones alone. It is embedded in the need for connection, for recognition, for being seen and valued. The ache of absence reveals the depth of the mystery. Sex matters not just for survival, but for meaning. Without it, people often feel isolated, incomplete, or diminished. With it, they feel alive, connected, and whole. The universality of sex underscores its mystery. Across cultures, times, and circumstances, humans seek it. It is one of the few experiences that crosses every boundary: age, race, class, language, geography. Yet within this universality, the experience remains uniquely personal. One person's intimacy cannot be replicated by another. Each moment is unrepeatable, shaped by specific bodies, minds, histories, and contexts. This paradox, universal yet unique, is what makes sex such a mystery. It belongs to everyone, yet it feels singular to each. Reflecting on your own existence, you realize that sex is the reason you are alive. Generations before, you were drawn together by the force of pleasure, by chemistry and connection, by love and longing. Biology ensured survival, but mystery gave it meaning. You are here because two people, in a fleeting moment, experienced something larger than themselves. That moment was both biology and beyond biology, a universal act that also felt singular. The mystery of sex is that it is both science and story, both mechanism and magic. Sex feels so good because biology made it irresistible, but it remains inexplicable because it is more than biology. It is psychology, culture, intimacy, memory, imagination, and love. It is a place where science can trace signals but cannot capture meaning, where explanation fades into wonder. The universal mystery is not why sex exists, but why it feels like more than survival, why it matters so deeply, why it lingers in memory as something larger than life. Perhaps the mystery is not meant to be solved but lived, carried forward in each moment of connection, each act of intimacy. Each reminder that to be human is to experience joy that cannot be reduced to parts. Sex is a universal mystery because it is at once the most ordinary act of biology and the most extraordinary act of being alive.